Chapter 343. For a foundation establishment stage cultivator to frequently experience dizziness and blurred vision, this was clearly a very strange thing. Therefore, when Qin came back, Qin Ruoying immediately told Qin about this matter. When she said this, Qin immediately exploded like a big cat. Gu Lao greeted him with a smile, but his face was cold. He didn't even respond and directly pulled Qin Ruoying to the back kitchen of the tea house. Qin couldn't be blamed for losing his composure. After all, there weren't many things in this world that were worthy of his attention. If something really happened to Qin Ruoying, Qin was afraid that he would go berserk on the spot. He would never be as harmless as before, but it was strange. Although Qin Ruoying's aptitude was average, in any case she was now able to cultivate, right? Her earth soul had returned to her body. In the case of 3 complete souls, how could she fall ill? Not to mention what realm Qin Ruoying's cultivation had reached. Even if she really did have some kind of strange illness, Qin, as the best doctor in the world, wouldn't be able to find the problem? Due to all kinds of worries, Qin was really nervous this time. Where did the problem come from? Out of caution, Qin first used the amplification effect of the soul crystal to greatly increase the strength of his divine soul. Only then did he release his divine sense to carefully investigate Qin Ruoying's body. There was no problem with the body's organs, 5 viscera, 6 bowels and 8 major systems. Since the whole person was healthy, the problem was obviously in the divine soul. Therefore, Qin gave the soul crystal to Qin Ruoying, and then let her try to let her divine soul out of her body. Perhaps it was because Qin Ruoying's current cultivation was too low, so even if he used the soul crystal to force her divine soul out of her body, Qin couldn't see anything wrong with her divine soul. From the perspective of an immortal cultivator, the soul was the most important organ in the human body. Without the soul, a human would be nothing more than a walking corpse. An ordinary person's soul was hidden in their heart aperture. Only after they had successfully cultivated could their soul leave their heart aperture and completely merge with their yuanying, becoming the second life of the cultivator. As long as yuanying did not die, her spirit would not be destroyed. That was why there was the saying of possession and rebirth. The heart aperture was where the soul was stored. It was also the most mysterious and important part of the human body. Since he could not find any problems with the divine soul, Qin speculated that the problem should lie here. Therefore he was now faced with a choice, and that was, should he allow his spirit to enter Qin Ruoying's heart aperture? Qin had never tried to let his spirit enter someone else's heart aperture. After all, what was the difference between this and possession? He believed that other than Qin Ruoying, there was absolutely no one in this world who would let him enter their heart aperture without reservation. Qin was somewhat apprehensive, because the difference in their cultivation was too great. If Qin Ruoying's divine soul was a small pond, then Qin was the boundless ocean. What would happen if he poured the water from the ocean into a small pond? Qin had never heard of such a situation, so naturally he had never seen it before. Therefore, not to mention trying it out, just imagining it made him somewhat fearful. Qin Ruoying was the most important person in his life. If something went wrong and hurt her heart aperture, Qin was afraid that he could only commit suicide to apologize to the world. What to do? He couldn't advance or retreat. For a moment, Qin was stunned. Qin Ruoying saw Qin's worry, so after thinking about it again and again she said gently, don't worry so much. You see, I'm fine now. It shouldn't be a big problem. Qin did not immediately reply. After a long silence, he said with a dignified face, no, this matter is not simple. We must find the problem. After saying that, he wanted to use the soul crystal to check Qin Ruoying's divine soul again. But at this moment, the little girl suddenly ran over with her phone in her arms. Mama. The phone is ringing. The phone is ringing. Although she was illiterate, she could still distinguish between ringtones and music, so she ran to Qin Ruoying's side and held the phone high as if she was presenting a treasure. Qin Ruoying took the phone and found that she did not receive a phone call, but a text message. The sender was Qin Yongyan, and the content was very short. The general meaning was that he had something to do and was going out for a while, so the couple did not have to worry. Qin Yongyan had always lived in seclusion. Today he went out for the first time, which made Qin Ruoying feel a little strange. However, the elders naturally did not need to report to the younger generation, so she did not take this matter to heart. After showing it to Qin, she returned the phone to the little girl. The little girl was busy playing games. She took the phone and ran out of the hall. But just after she ran 2 steps, she seemed to have thought of something. She quickly turned her head and asked with a puzzled face, Mama, what are you doing here? Mama is talking to Papa about the purchase of goods. Oh. The little girl nodded woodenly, but her legs seemed to be rooted to the ground, and she stood there motionless. With her current reaction, she did not need to think to know that the little girl wanted them to go out and keep her company because they had not come out for a long time. This made she feel very gratified. Games were not as important as parents. Meanwhile, on an unknown island. Just like the Ice and Fire Island described by Mr. Jin Yong, it was full of spiritual energy and full of vitality. The scenery on the island was even more beautiful, like a fairyland. Such an excellent tourist spot, but so far few people knew about it. No one had set foot on it all year round. This island was the legendary East Sea Immortal Mountain, Diyu Island. The reason why ordinary people could not find this island was that there was a large array on the island that gathered spiritual energy, defended it, and concealed it. The ancient cultivators had left, but their inheritance was left behind. The village hidden in the depths of Qinling was the place of inheritance, but there was more than one place of inheritance in this world. Diyu Island was one of them. Diyu Island was also a place of inheritance, but there was a big difference between Diyu Island and All Saints Valley. All Saints Valley was run by the clan elders. As long as foreign cultivators passed the test of the clan elders, they could join All Saints Valley and officially become a member of the village. The two words Fang Xiuan, carved on the stone tablet outside the village, were the foundation of the village. Shape does not exist, Fang Xiuan accepts. All rivers run into the sea. All Saints Valley was very inclusive, so whether it was martial artists, necromancers, or other inheritances, everyone could live in harmony in the village and learn from each other in order to break through to the diviner level as soon as possible, or even ascend to the divine gate. Compared to All Saints Valley, Diyu Island was more mysterious and naturally more isolated. It did not accept outsiders and was never open to the outside world, so the residents of the island had always had the same surname. They were of the same clan and had been passed down from generation to generation. Chapter 344. East Sea Immortal Mountain, Diyu Island. Diyu Island was not an isolated island, but a group of more than 10 small islands. It was like a county with more than 10 villages under its jurisdiction. 17 small islands were scattered randomly on the sea. Although the islands were not connected, they were not very far apart either. As far as the eye could see, it was all clear and transparent seawater, fine golden beaches, and lush forests. This place was like a pure land that had never been polluted by industry. Everything was so beautiful. In such a paradise, it was natural that it would be flourishing and flourishing. Therefore, the residents of the island all had the same surname, Jiang. One had to know that the origin of surnames could be traced back to the birth of new humans. At that time, humans were still in a matriarchal system, so many surnames had the word woman in them. Jiang was one of the 8 great ancient surnames. Ever since the ancient cultivators left, the Jiang clansmen left on Earth had sealed themselves on Diyu Island. If not for the serious dangers of close kin reproduction and the need to inject new blood into the clan from time to time, the Jiang clan would never allow any outsiders to set foot on Diyu Island. It was precisely because the Jiang clan had followed the ancestral teachings of seclusion for so many years that the Jiang clan's inheritance was extremely complete. This had become the thing that the Jiang clan was most proud of. Just like the rumors in the outside world, they were what the ordinary cultivators were talking about, descendants of immortals. However, due to the gradual weakening of Earth's spirit energy, even the ancient cultivators could only stay away from it, let alone these abandoned children left behind on Earth. Therefore, rather than saying that the Jiang clan was conserving their strength, it was better to say that they were struggling at death's door here. At their worst, there was not even a single immortal in the entire Jiang clan. However, this was all in the past. With the gradual recovery of spirit energy, the Jiang clan was about to welcome its most glorious moment. The current clan leader, Jiang Yuankue, was very confident about this. On this day, Jiang Yuankue was handling clan affairs in the ancestral hall of Qixia Peak when a clan disciple suddenly came to report, interrupting his train of thought. Clan leader, someone wants to see you. Who is it? This person is from the All Saints Valley. His name is Qin Yongyan. All Saints Valley? Wasn't it destroyed long ago? Jiang Yuankue repeated this phrase, and a faint smile appeared on his face. It was obvious that there had been some unpleasantness between Diyu Island and All Saints Valley. Jiang Yuankue pondered for a moment, then coldly said to the messenger, "It seems that those old things are really dead. Now, a junior of the young generation wants to see me? Tell him to scram." Hearing this, the messenger had an extremely awkward expression on his face. After a moment of hesitation, he said cautiously, "Sir, that person also said that He is Mr. Chen's father-in-law, Mr. Chen? Jiang Yuankui froze for a moment. Then he seemed to think of something but he wasn't sure. He frowned and asked, which Mr. Chen? He's the one who soared to immortality with a single sword strike in Taihang Mountain? Jiang Yuankui was silent. After a long moment of silence, he said solemnly, tell him to come see me. Yes, Patriarch. At the foot of Qixia Peak. Qin Yongyan stood proudly in front of the mountain gate in a plain robe. Although it was called a peak, it was actually only a few dozen meters high. From afar, one could see the cornice of the ancestral shrine at the top of the mountain. Perhaps it was because no stranger had appeared on Daiyu Island for a long time, so when Qin Yongyan stood there, countless Jiang family members couldn't help but come to take a look. Qin Yongyan was like an old monk in meditation. After standing there for more than 10 minutes, the Jiang clan member who went to deliver the message hurriedly rushed over. Mr. Qin, please come with me. Then the man led Qin Yongyan to the square outside the ancestral shrine. Qin Yongyan had been silent the whole time, but when he arrived at the square, he set his eyes on the giant bronze cauldron. This giant cauldron, All Saints Valley once had one. Qin Yongyan didn't have to wait long in the square before a man in a brown brocade robe strode out. This man looked about the same age as him, probably in his 40s, but his tone was slightly arrogant. As soon as he saw Qin Yongyan, he asked impatiently, tell me, why are you here? Junior Qin Yongyan greets Mr. Jiang. Cultivators naturally couldn't be judged by their appearances. Although Jiang Yuankui's attitude wasn't good, Qin Yongyan still bowed respectfully to him. Jiang Yuankui naturally had the right to be arrogant. After all, his age and seniority were much higher than Qin Yongyan's. However, when Jiang Yuankui approached Qin Yongyan, he suddenly realized Qin Yongyan had actually stepped into the celestial being realm, which surprised Jiang Yuankui quite a bit. A junior with the surname Yong should be between 40 and 60 years old, but he had already stepped into the celestial being realm? This kind of cultivation aptitude was rare even in the Jiang family. No wonder this man dared to climb Qixia Peak alone to ask for a meeting. Jiang Yuankui frowned as he sized up Qin Yongyan. Seeing that he didn't answer, Qin Yongyan cupped his hands and bowed. He said directly, I know that outsiders are not allowed to set foot on Daiyu Island. The reason why I came so abruptly this time is that I have a question that I would like to ask Mr. Jiang. Tell me about it. Because the Jiang family's inheritance was relatively complete, since ancient times, many cultivators had wanted to come to the island to seek guidance. Under normal circumstances, if it didn't involve too many secrets, or if he happened to be in a good mood at that time, the Jiang family's patriarch would answer the question, which could be considered as forming a good relationship with the outside world. As a result, the Jiang family's reputation naturally became more and more well known. Thank you, Mr. Jiang. Qin Yongyan bowed again, then slowly said, I have an only daughter who entered the ancestral hall at the age of 8 and became Shen Nu. In the blink of an eye, 20 years have passed and my daughter has married and has children, living a stable and happy life. Qin Yongyan narrated in a calm tone. But when Jiang Yuankui heard the two words Shen Nu, he frowned on the spot. This was because he had already guessed what Qin Yongyan wanted to ask. Just as expected. Qin Yongyan said some seemingly long-winded words, but in the end he suddenly changed the topic and said, My wife is also Shen Nu, so I know very well that most Shen Nu won't live past 40. This kind of tragedy has happened once before and now it's happening to my daughter again. Let me say something disrespectful to the ancestors. If I could turn back time, even if I had to sacrifice my life, I would never let my daughter become Shen Nu. Unfortunately, it's too late to say anything now. Speaking up to this point, Qin Yongyan raised his head and glanced at Jiang Yuankui. Then, with a solemn expression, he said, This junior has heard that most of the mystical maidens of the Jiang clan will have good endings. Therefore I took the liberty to visit. I only hope that Mr. Jiang can dispel this junior's doubts and save my daughter who has finally managed to live a good life. After saying this, Qin Yongyan bowed again, very respectfully to Jiang Yuankui. Jiang Yuankui silently looked at Qin Yongyan. After being silent for a long time, he said in a deep voice, Get up first. Hearing this, Qin Yongyan's face lit up with joy. Just as he was about to thank him, he heard Jiang Yuankui sigh and say, I'm very sorry. Chapter 345. The sea breeze blew over the mountains and over the treetops, gently carrying fallen leaves to the square outside the ancestral shrine. After hearing Jiang Yuankui's reply, Qin Yongyan's heart sank. He hurriedly bowed and begged, I have also heard that the Jiang clan's secret has never been mentioned to outsiders. However, this matter concerns my daughter's life, so I have no choice but to treat it seriously. Mister, you are the leader of a clan. If you have any difficulties, this junior can understand. I only hope that sir can give me some pointers and point out a path for my poor daughter. This junior will definitely remember such a great favor in his heart at all times. Thank you for your trouble, sir. After speaking, Qin Yongyan bowed to Jiang Yuankui again. The meaning of his words was very clear. Even if Jiang Yuankui could not reveal it due to the clan rules, he could still give him some pointers. In any case, he could give him a direction to work towards. Then he could find a solution in that direction. This request did not seem excessive, but Jiang Yuankui did not know why. After hearing Qin Yongyan's words, he responded with an expressionless face, I already said that I cannot help you with this matter, please go back. After speaking, Jiang Yuankui flicked his sleeves and turned to walk back to the ancestral shrine. Sir Jiang, please stay. Qin Yongyan could not help but feel anxious. He could not help but take a few steps forward, wanting to say a few words to Jiang Yuankui. However, at this time, a young man appeared in front of him at an extremely fast speed. Then he stretched out his right hand and stopped Qin Yongyan. The clan leader's meaning is very clear. Please go back. Qin Yongyan glanced at the young man, only to discover that this young man was actually a diviner-level expert. For a moment he was unable to advance or retreat. Qin Yongyan's face revealed a look of struggle. After hesitating for a moment, he suddenly bent his knees in front of this young man, and with a plop, he knelt on the ground. I hope that Sir Jiang will be merciful and save my poor daughter. A diviner was actually doing such a thing. This made the young man feel a little surprised, so he could not help but look at Jiang Yuankui, wanting to hear his opinion. Jiang Yuankui stopped, but he didn't turn around. It's not that I don't want to help you, but I can't. Her fate was sealed the moment she became the Siming Xian Nu. Isn't it too late for you to regret it now? At this point, Jiang Yuankui suddenly glanced at the young man and said, Feng Yin, help me see the guest out. Yes, Patriarch. The young man called Feng Yin nodded. Then he reached out his right hand and said to Qin Yongyan, Mr. Qin, please go back. Qin Yongyan knelt on the ground and remained silent for a long time. In the end, he gently shook his head and said in a very lonely voice, Forget it. I have disturbed Mr. today. I hope Mr. won't blame me. I will take my leave now. After that, Qin Yongyan stood up and slowly walked down the mountain. As they walked, they listened to the constant gurgling sounds of the waves. Qin Yongyan seemed to have suddenly thought of something, and a self-mocking smile appeared on his face. He had personally sent Qin Roying to the ancestral hall, and now it was too late for regrets. The reason he regretted it was all because of that cheap son-in-law. Qin Yongyan would never forget that day. All Saints Valley. In a small courtyard at the back of the mountain. When Qin Shi faced everyone and loudly shouted, Let's go home, it was like a heavy hammer hitting Qin Yongyan's heart. His voice was as loud as a bell and as loud as thunder. It also made him completely wake up. Qin Yongyan was in great pain as he watched his lover die in his arms, but he didn't understand why he was in pain. Everything about the Siming Xian Nu was normal for everyone in the village. In everyone's opinion, becoming the Xian Nu was always an extremely glorious thing. Even if they knew that the Xian Nu would have a shorter lifespan. Becoming the Xian Nu was the most glorious thing in All Saints Valley since ancient times. Children of 8 or 9 years old were ignorant. If the elders said that the Xian Nu was good, the children would naturally want to become the respected Xian Nu. Until they reached adulthood, until they died prematurely due to the exhaustion of their lifespan. They always believed that being able to become the Xian Nu was their blessing. Everything had been deeply ingrained in them. Qin Yongyan finally understood why he had felt pain in the past. What was the purpose of life? For the current him, being able to see his daughter grow up and live a happy and stable life was the most meaningful thing. As for the rest, it wasn't important. In order to make up for his mistakes, the first thing Qin Yongyan did after becoming a diviner was to seek help from Daiyu Island. Since the rules were set by humans, they could naturally make 1 or 2 exceptions. But unfortunately, Qin Yongyan's ability was limited, and he didn't have enough face. Jiang Yuankui obviously couldn't break the rules for him. He couldn't, but someone else could. Thinking of this, Qin Yongyan couldn't help but chuckle. But there was a bit of loneliness, a bit of unwillingness in that smile, and at the same time, a bit of consolation. He was old, he couldn't take care of his daughter like before. He had taken care of Ying for half his life, but now this responsibility fell on the shoulders of someone else. For a father, this feeling was indeed a bit complicated. But no matter what, as long as Ying could be happy as a father, he didn't care. Polygonum Jigub Bandit Ihao. Mourning for my parents who gave birth to me. Polygonum jigu bandit ihao. Mourning for my parents who gave birth to me. When Qin Yongyan's figure disappeared from the foot of the mountain, Jiang Fengyan thoughtfully came to the ancestral hall. There were no outsiders present, so Jiang Fengyan directly called out to Jiang Yuankue, "Father." Jiang Yuankue held 3 sticks of incense and stood in front of the ancestral tablets respectfully. After inserting the incense in his hand into the incense burner, Jiang Yuankue turned around and asked, "Is he gone?" "Yes." Jiang Fengyan responded. Then he said with a confused expression, "Father, I don't understand." "What don't you understand? You don't even know this, do you? Qin Yongyan's daughter is called Qin Ruoying. I heard that it was because of her that the All Saints Valley was flattened by Mr. Qin." "So what?" Jiang Fengyan was stunned for a moment. He seemed to be completely unable to understand Jiang Yuankue's approach, so he hurriedly said, "Father, Mr. Qin is above the celestial being. It's completely inappropriate to offend him over a few words, right?" Jiang Yuankue didn't answer. Seeing this, Jiang Fengyan gritted his teeth and continued, "The spirit energy has been surging too much recently. Second granduncle may break through at any time. If we take this opportunity to build a good relationship with Mr. Qin, we may be able to ask him for help. If he's so helpful, why do you have to push him away?" Seeing Jiang Fengyan's puzzled look, Jiang Yuankue laughed and said, "Fengyan, you're oversimplifying things. Let's not talk about your second granduncle first. This Si Ming Shen Nu is actually not as simple as you think," Jiang Yuankue explained with a smile. However, Jiang Fengyan still couldn't agree with his point of view, so he couldn't help but shout, "Father!" He wanted to say something, but Jiang Yuankue waved his hand directly, indicating that he should stop talking. "Just wait and see. If Mr. Qin really cares about that woman, then he'll definitely go to Daiyu Island himself. When that time comes." Chapter 346. Because of Qin Ruoying's illness, Qin Shi had been thinking hard about how to solve it, so he didn't realize that he was neglecting the little one. Since he came back, it was the first time he completely ignored the little one's feelings. Of course, the little one was a little unhappy. "I'm not happy. I'm not happy." So, early in the morning, the little one stuck to Qin Shi and insisted that Qin Shi play games with her. She didn't know why she suddenly became so clingy. Qin Ruoying wanted to take her to wash up, but the little one refused to go no matter what. She even put on a look of disdain and didn't want Qin Ruoying to get close to her. Seeing this, the couple couldn't help but look at each other. Why did this child suddenly start to throw a tantrum? Qin Ruoying couldn't do anything about it, so she had to let Qin Shi serve her. How to serve her? He could only play games with her and make her happy. The little one especially liked to play Fruit Ninja, which was a casual game that was popular all over the world. As long as you cut the fruit on the screen with your finger, you could get points. Although the gameplay was simple, it was very playable. Qin Shi patiently played with her for a while, but the little thing was getting more and more excited. No matter what she said, she wouldn't wash up. Qin Shi had no choice but to snatch the phone from her hand and show her a series of gorgeous combos. Then he pretended to be careless and deliberately cut the bomb and died. Seeing that her father was so powerful but still died, the little one immediately laughed happily. Seeing that she was finally happy, Qin Shi immediately carried her to the bathroom and helped her wash up as fast as he could. After that, Qin Shi used a lot of effort to make the little one swallow her breakfast. 4 or 5-year-old children were the most mischievous. Even an obedient and sensible child like Nian Nian would inevitably be mischievous sometimes. So even if she was extra mischievous today, the couple didn't take it to heart. But the more they didn't care, the more this little thing acted up. On the way to the tea house, Qin Shi said to go left, but she insisted on going right. It was as if she was deliberately going against Qin Shi. She was already so pretentious. If Qin Shi still didn't realize that the little fellow was deliberately being difficult, he would be too irresponsible as a father. Thus, Qin Shi squatted beside the little girl, preparing to coax her. However, this little thing proudly turned its little face away and put on a look of not wanting to talk to him. Seeing her attitude, Qin Shi knew the seriousness of the matter. Therefore, he put on a very exaggerated expression, and as if he was performing in a stage play, he imitated Uncle Benshin's northeastern accent and said in a low muffled voice, "What's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong with little darling today? Why are you so unhappy?" Looking at Qin Shi's performance, the little fellow suddenly couldn't hold it in. After twisting her small body proudly for a while, she said indignantly under Qin Shi's constant questioning, "I don't like Papa anymore." After that, the little thing made a gesture to push Qin Shi away. Looking at her aggressive posture, how could he let go of her at this time? Therefore, Qin hugged her tighter. Oh, what's wrong? What did Papa do to make you unhappy? Don't you always say that you like Papa the most and then Mama the most? Why don't you like Papa all of a sudden? Hearing this, the little thing seemed to suddenly think of something unhappy. She pouted on the spot and then said to Qin with a stubborn face, I don't like Papa anymore. Go and play with Mama. Don't play with me. As soon as these words came out, the couple couldn't help but laugh out loud. It turned out that, was his daughter jealous of her mother? Recently, Qin had been sticking to Qin Ruoying all day, for fear that something would happen to her. Although the little fellow had games to play and the two brothers to accompany her, her father's abnormal behavior still attracted her attention, and she couldn't help but feel a little down in her heart. Papa used to care about her a lot. Papa also cared about Mama, but he cared more about her. The little fellow was now in the sex bud stage, and it was actually very normal for her to have an Oedipus complex. This was a stage that children had to go through in their growth process. It was not a twisted mentality, nor was it a big problem. Because once this stage was passed, they might completely forget that they had a complex relationship with their biological father against their mother. In this regard, Qin naturally had to make appropriate guidance. So after thinking for a while, he looked into the little fellow's eyes and said to her very seriously, Nian, do you know? Mama is sick? Hearing this, the expression on the little fellow's face suddenly froze. She seemed to be very surprised, and after hearing Qin's words, she quickly turned to look at Qin Ruoying. Aunt Zhang's health wasn't good, and she used to have old illnesses from time to time. The little fellow stayed by her side all year round, so she was very sensitive to the word sick, since she was young. This was because she knew that once her grandmother fell sick, she would feel very uncomfortable, and sometimes she couldn't even stand up. She had never experienced that feeling, but she could still feel her grandmother's pain from the side. Therefore, every time this happened, she would be exceptionally obedient, and wouldn't cause trouble for Aunt Zhang at all. Now that Qin suddenly said that Qin Ruoying was sick, it naturally brought back the little fellow's bad memories, so she hesitated for a moment, and then asked timidly, What's wrong with Mama? Mama is sick. Although it's not very serious, there's no way for her to recover in a short period of time. Oh. The little fellow blinked her eyes and her expression was a little stiff, as if she didn't understand what Qin meant at all. Seeing this, Qin continued to try to guide her. When a person is sick, they will become very weak. Does that mean they need someone to take care of them? This time, the little fellow finally understood, so she nodded and answered resolutely, Yes. You and Mama are the people that Papa cares about the most. Now that Mama is sick, shouldn't Papa take good care of Mama? Yes. But Papa has to take care of Mama, then he won't have time to play with you. Will you be angry? No. I'm not angry. Nian is so sensible. Mua. Seeing that the little fellow listened to his words, Qin kissed her little face as a reward. After Qin's reasonable guidance, the little fellow seemed to realize that her previous behavior was wrong, so after hesitating for a while, she signaled Qin to let go of her. After Qin put her on the ground, the little fellow jumped to Qin Ruoying's side, then pulled Qin Ruoying's hand and said loudly, Mama is sick, we have to take good care of Mama. After saying that, the little fellow looked up at Qin Ruoying and added, Grandma said that when you're sick, you can't walk. We have to hold Mama's hand and walk. This silly child, just now he was still cold to her, but now he suddenly became very kind. His face changed faster than flipping a book. Looking at the cute little thing in front of her, Qin Ruoying couldn't get angry even if she wanted to. So she could only smile and rub her head, then rolled her eyes at Qin as if she was complaining silently, It's all your fault. Chapter 347. The little girl felt that she had been neglected recently. In order to prevent her from having such thoughts, Qin brought her around Ho-Hai. After playing with her for a while, the family of three slowly strolled back to the tea house. Her mother had become a patient, and the little girl was very concerned about it. So when she returned to the tea house, she didn't even have time to say hello to the brothers before she ran into the bar. She raised her head and asked Xiao Yuan to pour her a cup of hot water. The little girl eagerly brought the hot water to Qin Ruoying. No matter what, she wanted Qin Ruoying to take the medicine first. Qin Ruoying had never been to the hospital, so how could she have any medicine on her? So she could only tell the little girl that it didn't matter and that she would be fine after a few days of rest. But the little girl didn't listen to anything she said. Because in the little girl's mind, she must take medicine when she was sick. Only by taking medicine can she be cured. This was also the idea that Aunt Zhang had instilled in her since she was young. It was to prevent her from being unwilling to take medicine when she was sick in the future. He didn't expect that after leaving Aunt Zhang for so long, the little girl could still remember this. This made Qin feel gratified. It was rare for her daughter to be so filial, so Qin Ruoying naturally couldn't discourage her. So after hesitating for a while, she took a Peiyuan pill from Qin Shi and pretended to take it. Seeing this, the little girl finally felt relieved. Then, as usual, she got together with the brothers and continued to play games. For a child, being happy was the most important thing. As long as she was happy every day, this childhood was worth remembering. Time flew by and it was almost summer vacation. According to the couple's plan, after this summer vacation, the little girl would have to go to a senior class. The school would definitely be the top school, but it wasn't to force the little girl to be a top student. It was to give her a change of environment so that she could be in contact with more children of the same age. On the other hand, it was also because these three little things had been playing too much recently. If they were left alone, it wouldn't be long before they would fumble around playing Mobile Legends. Playing games was addictive. Children had poor self-control, so it was better to play less. School was obviously the best place to go to rehab. After the start of summer, Hohai became lively again. Enjoying the cool air was different from enjoying the air conditioning, so after Qiao Yuan opened the door, she moved out a few sets of tables and chairs so that the guests could drink tea under the shade of a tree and enjoy the beautiful scenery of the lakeside. It had to be said that Qiao Yuan was indeed very competent as a shopkeeper. The little girl was well behaved and had a sweet tongue. With her efforts during this period of time, she had indeed brought in many regular customers for the tea house. Although they were still in a state of loss, it was much better than before when they couldn't make ends meet. Seeing that the weather was gradually improving, Qiao Yuan bought a string of wind chimes from the internet and hung them on the door curtain. Every time the wind blew, a crisp and melodious ringing sound could be heard. It had a unique charm to it. The small tea house was still the same small tea house, but it was more lively than before. Perhaps it was an illusion, but Qin Shi felt that his current life was like a tranquil lake. It was calm on the surface, but undercurrents were surging. He liked his current stable and ordinary life, so he didn't want to see any changes. Qin Ruoying's illness was an unknown variable to Qin Shi. It had to be said that his sister-in-law came back at the right time. Qin Xueqing was also a Xian Nu. When Qin Shi asked her if she had the same feelings, Qin Xueqing immediately gave an affirmative answer. But there was something strange. Qin Xueqing's symptoms weren't very obvious. Sometimes, the symptoms would disappear without anyone noticing. Qin Shi couldn't help but suspect that it was because the time it took for the soul to return to the body was too short, and Qin Ruoying's cultivation was too low, so there was a normal rejection reaction. But no matter what, as long as a person felt any discomfort, it must be a warning from the body. Therefore he still had to treat it with caution and pay more attention to it. How to observe. Of course, he had to stay by Qin Ruoying's side all day. Therefore the person playing chess with Gu Lao now became Qin Ruoying. Although Qin Ruoying's chess skills weren't that good, she relied on Qin Shi's pointers to barely be able to play chess with the old man. Wasn't this the same as slaying Gu Lao's dragon? The three people chatted while playing chess, when the wind chime at the door suddenly rang. Ring ring ring. The sound of the wind chime was crisp and pleasing to the ear. Qin Ruoying subconsciously turned her head to look, and was immediately shocked and stood up. Dad, why are you here? The person who came was Qin Yongyan. He was wearing a white traditional training suit today. This kind of outfit was particularly eye-catching in Hohai, which was famous for its bars. Qin Ruoying smiled and went forward to greet Qin Yongyan. Qin Shi also stood up and greeted, Dad. But as soon as the voice fell, Qin Shi slightly frowned. Something seemed wrong. Qin Ruoying didn't notice the strangeness. After introducing Qin Yongyan to Gu Lao, she pulled Qin Yongyan to sit on the side and talked. Dad, is this your first time here? I thought you couldn't find it. I just came back from outside. Seeing that you weren't at home, I thought I'd come here to take a look. Okay, I'll call Nyin Yin over and let her play with you for a while. After that, Qin Ruoying turned around and was ready to call the little girl over, but was stopped by Qin Yongyan with a smile. It's okay, isn't that child playing happily? Don't disturb her. Okay then. Although the father and daughter lived under the same roof because Qin Yongyan was busy cultivating all day, they usually didn't even see each other face to face. Qin Yongyan rarely came to the tea house, so Qin Ruoying naturally had to accompany him to have a good talk. Since the old father-in-law came, this game of chess could only be temporarily suspended. After Qin Shi excused himself to Gu Lao, He went to the bar to pour a cup of tea, and then sat next to Qin Ruoying. The father and daughter were chatting about daily life. After seeing Qin Shi come over, Qin Yongyan smiled and said to the couple, "Today I actually have something to tell you." Seeing this, Qin Ruoying leaned forward slightly and put on a look of listening attentively. But Qin Yongyan didn't immediately speak, but looked around with a smile. Qin Shi immediately understood what he meant, so he immediately set up a soundproof restriction, and then frowned and directly asked the question in his heart. "Are you injured?" From the moment Qin Yongyan entered the door, Qin Shi found that his breath was not very stable, so he had this guess. Hearing this, Qin Yongyan didn't hide, nodded and explained with a smile, "I had a small misunderstanding with someone before, but it has been solved." At this time, Qin Ruoying on the side finally recovered and couldn't help but exclaim, "Are you injured? Where are you injured? Is it serious? Let me see." Qin Ruoying wanted to see where he was injured, but was stopped by Qin Yongyan with a smile. "Don't worry, it's just a small injury." "How can that be?" She quickly helped Dad take a look. "Don't leave any hidden dangers." Under Qin Ruoying's repeated requests, Qin Yongyan had to stretch out his right hand for Qin Shi to check. Then Qin Shi found that Qin Yongyan's breath was in disorder because his meridians were injured. For a celestial, this degree of injury was naturally nothing, and he would recover in 2 or 3 days. Of course, the injury was not the main point was the injured person. Qin Ruoying kept asking Qin Yongyan how he was injured, but Qin Yongyan avoided this topic. After a few fruitless inquiries, Qin Ruoying could only pout and sit there sulking. She was already a mother, yet she was still acting like an angry little girl. Qin Yongyan couldn't help but chuckle at her antics. "Ying, I came here today mainly to talk to you about some things about your mother. If you don't want to listen, I'll go back first." After saying that, Qin Yongyan got up and pretended to leave. Chapter 348. Looking at Qin Ruoying's resentful look, Qin Yongyan had a different feeling in his heart. In the blink of an eye, Ying had grown up and had a child of her own. So fast, Qin Yongyan sorted out his thoughts. After Qin Ruoying sat down quietly, he said slowly, "Ying, do you still remember when you were young you loved to ask where your mother went?" "Of course I remember. At that time, when I saw that everyone else had a mother, I couldn't help but feel a little disappointed, so I always pestered you to ask where my mother went." As Qin Ruoying spoke, she couldn't help but look sideways at the little guy. As a mother, she had the deepest understanding of this child's feelings. "It's been hard on you." Qin Yongyan sighed softly. Then he changed the topic and said calmly, "I didn't tell you before. In fact, your mother didn't die of illness. She died of old age. She didn't experience any pain. She just lay in my arms and quietly passed away." After saying that, Qin Yongyan smiled and made a hugging gesture, as if he was showing her the scene at that time. After Qin Ruoying heard his words, a very surprised expression appeared on her face. She even suspected that she had heard wrongly. Died of old age. Qin Ruoying's doubts didn't last long. Qin Yongyan smiled and explained to himself, "Yes, died of old age. Your mother's health has always been very good. She passed away only because she exhausted her lifespan. But it's a pity that, the year she passed away, she had just turned 36. At this point, Qin Yongyan couldn't suppress the surging emotions in his heart. Gradually, some indescribable expressions appeared on his face. There was sadness, reluctance, longing, and at the same time pain and regret. "After knowing you, there was no one else in the world. Just like going through the sea, how could I have mercy on the rivers? The person has passed away, but the thoughts remain forever." The hearts of father and daughter were connected. Qin Yongyan's heart was filled with a myriad of thoughts. Qin Ruoying's eyes also turned red. The atmosphere suddenly became much more oppressive. Seeing this, Qin Shi gently held Qin Ruoying's hand. Then he asked thoughtfully, "She exhausted her lifespan at 36 years old. Is there any secret behind this?" Hearing this, Qin Yongyan immediately nodded and replied, "I came to you today for this matter. Actually, Ying's mother, she used to be Xian Nu." After hearing the 2 words, Xian Nu's eyes. Obviously she didn't like this name. Qin Shi noticed Qin Ruoying's strange behavior and gently squeezed her palm, indicating for her to relax and listen to Qin Yongyan first. Xian Nu's status in the village is very high. No matter what wish she has, everyone will try their best to fulfill it. And the reason why they receive such preferential treatment is mainly because most Xian Nu won't live past 40, so this is actually a form of compensation in disguise. After hearing Qin Yongyan's words, Qin Ruoying's face instantly turned ugly. Qin was already mentally prepared for this. He already knew a little about Ming Xiannu's problem from Bai Hong. Fortunately, he had already found Yingying's earth soul, so she shouldn't be like her mother, who had already passed away when she was still young. However, although her earth soul was found, Qin Ruoying still had symptoms of dizziness recently. This made Qin very anxious. After all, Bai Hong's knowledge was limited, so he couldn't be sure if Qin Ruoying still had any hidden dangers. Qin Yongyan suddenly mentioned Xiannu, so he must know something. Therefore, Qin immediately asked, "Is there any solution?" Hearing this, Qin Yongyan shook his head and couldn't help but sigh. "I don't know either. Xiannu of All Saints Valley has a short lifespan since ancient times. Everyone is already used to this. No solution?" "Not really." Seeing Qin's anxious expression, Qin Yongyan couldn't help but feel happy for his daughter. With such a husband, what more could a woman ask for? However, now wasn't the time to talk about this, so after a slight pause he continued, "Xiannu of All Saints Valley has a short lifespan, but there's a place where Xiannu is an exception." "What place?" "Daiyu Island." Then Qin Yongyan told Qin all the information he knew. Ming Xiannu came from the Land of Legacy. In this world there was more than one Land of Legacy. Floating Mist Mountain, Daiyu Island, All Saints Valley, Misty Pavilion, and the Wind Listening and Rain Observing Building. This mountain, island, valley, palace, and building were the 5 great Land of Legacy left behind by the ancient cultivators. Most of the cultivation legacies circulating in the world now came from these 5 places. Among them, Floating Mist Mountain had disappeared for a long time, and it was hard to find any trace of it. The Misty Pavilion and the Wind Listening and Rain Observing Building still existed, but there had been internal strife in these 2 places, which led to the loss of their legacies. They might not be able to provide any effective help. Therefore, the only place with the most complete legacies was Daiyu Island, which had always been closed to the outside world. In fact, these things weren't much of a secret. Anyone above the peak strength stage would know something about it. Perhaps only hidden experts like Qin, who would rather deal with antis in the wet market than communicate with cultivators, knew nothing about these things. Of course, the legacies of Daiyu Island weren't the main point. The main point was, their Xiannu had a long lifespan. This was definitely not a coincidence. There must be a way to prevent Xiannu's lifespan from being shortened in Daiyu Island. East Sea Immortal Mountain, Daiyu Island? Qin repeated this sentence, then suddenly thought of something. After looking at Qin Yongyan thoughtfully, he asked, "You went to Daiyu Island the day before yesterday, right?" But without waiting for Qin Yongyan to reply, Qin continued, minding her own business. "In other words, the injuries on your body are related to the people on this island?" Qin Yongyan naturally knew what Qin meant. However, Qin Yongyan didn't intend to take revenge, so he just shook his head with a smile and didn't respond. "Okay, I understand." Speaking of this, Qin suddenly turned to look at the little girl beside him, then waved at her. The little girl was quite sensible. As soon as she saw her grandfather, she directly threw the phone to the 2 brothers and ran over eagerly. "Grandpa, you're here." After the little girl sat in Qin Yongyan's arms for a while, Qin smiled and said to her, "Nyan, Mom and Dad are going on a long trip. Do you want to go with us? If you don't want to go, you can stay at home and accompany me. What do you think?" Hearing this, the little girl jumped up from Qin Yongyan's arms as if she had been electrocuted. Then she shouted at the top of her lungs, "I want to go. I'll go wherever you go. Don't leave me behind." As she spoke, the little girl felt so wrong that she was about to cry. Seeing this, Qin could only reach out and pinch her little face, then smiled and comforted her. Okay. We won't leave you behind. How could Mom and Dad bear to leave you behind? If you want to go, we'll definitely take you there." After hearing Qin's words, the little girl's mood suddenly turned for the better. She couldn't help but smile and say, "Then where are we going?" Chapter 349. For a celestial being, it was naturally not difficult to ride the wind and enter the sea. Because the little fellow had to go with them, Qin did not choose to fly directly to Daiyu. Instead, he took the little fellow to Zhonghai by plane and borrowed a yacht from Ning Zhonghua, treating it as a sea trip. A yacht self-driving tour. This made the little fellow very happy. Once she got on the yacht, she chattered non-stop. This yacht was the one Ning Zhonghua used to entertain their family of 3 last time. It had 3 floors in total, and the decorations and configuration were extremely luxurious. Naturally, there was no need to bring any attendants with them on a self-driving tour, so Qin dismissed the staff on the yacht. As a result, there were only the 3 of them on this huge yacht. The sea breeze curled in spirals and the sparkling waves sparkled. No matter how bright the sun was, it did not have the slightest taste of summer heat. The little fellow knelt on the observation deck on the top floor of the yacht, her small body constantly twisting with the sway of the yacht. She chewed on the fruit chin she had peeled for her while looking at the distant skyline. Her little face was about to bloom with joy. Suddenly, the little fellow seemed to have thought of something. She suddenly jumped into Qin Ruoying's arms, and then said very coquettishly, "Mama, the next time we go out to play, can we bring Wenwen and Mingming along? They really want to come out with me to play." Hearing this, Qin Ruoying rubbed her head and responded with a smile, "Sure, the next time we go out, I'll persuade Grandpa. If he agrees, we'll bring Wenwen and Mingming along, okay?" "Okay." The little fellow laughed excitedly, her eyes full of excitement and anticipation. However, this excitement soon disappeared. When the city's skyline gradually disappeared from the sea, there was only the boundless sea and the boundless sky left. It was difficult to even see a bird. The blue sea and white clouds. On the boundless sea, there was only one yacht moving forward alone. This was a very beautiful scene, but how could a 5-year-old child know how to appreciate it? Therefore, after the excitement passed, the little guy began to feel a little bored and lay on the sofa motionless. When the last trace of patience was worn out and it raised its head to see the boundless sea, the little thing immediately flipped out. "Not fun at all. Not fun at all. I want to go back." Looking at her aggrieved face, those who didn't know better would think that she had been tricked by her parents. Qin Shi, who was preparing lunch in the kitchen, heard her shout, so he quickly put down what he was doing and quickly walked to the balcony. It would have been fine if Qin Shi hadn't come, but now that he had, the little thing immediately pouted and looked like it was about to burst into tears at any moment. Seeing this, Qin Shi could only stride forward and pick up the little thing from the sofa. Then he patiently asked, "Nian Nian, weren't you quite happy just now? Why are you suddenly angry?" "It's not fun here. I want to go back." The little thing's naughty temperament also came out. She twisted her body and kept shouting that she wanted to go home. In fact, she couldn't be blamed for being capricious. After all, the sea couldn't be compared to the mountains. In addition to all kinds of plants in the mountains, there were countless cute animals, but what about the sea? Other than the sea, there was only the sea. The sea was magnificent, but at the same time, it was also lonely. If the voyage was long, even the most experienced crew members could suffer from psychological problems, let alone a 5-year-old child like her. Qin Shi roughly calculated the coordinates given by Qin Yongyan. In fact, the journey wasn't too far. At the current sailing speed, they would probably reach Diyu Island in the evening. Although it was only a 5 to 6 hour voyage, there was no internet or cartoons on the ship. Even if she played with her phone without the company of the two brothers, the little thing would find it boring to play alone. Therefore, Qin Shi pondered for a while and once again took out his trump card, magic tricks. "Yin Yin, how about this? Daddy will show you a magic trick. I guarantee that you'll find it fun." Hearing this, the little thing who was noisy just now suddenly quieted down. She looked at Qin Shi eagerly. Needless to say, her little eyes were full of anticipation. It couldn't be helped. After all, Qin Shi's magic trick was already deeply ingrained in her heart. As long as the word magic trick was mentioned, it would instantly attract the little thing's full attention. Yin Yin watched carefully. Qin Shi pretended to smile mysteriously. After pinching the little thing's nose with his hand, he gently waved his arm toward the sea. The wind was gentle and the sun was bright. The blue sea was as soft as silk. When the breeze hit, there would be a slight ripple on the surface of the sea. It was unknown what method Qin Shi used, but the moment he waved his hand, the originally calm sea suddenly stirred up waves. After noticing the change in the sea, the little thing subconsciously opened her eyes wide. However, before she could regain her senses, countless fish suddenly jumped from the bottom of the sea. Like the legendary fish leaping over the Dragon Gate, countless fish continuously jumped high from the sea. After drawing a beautiful semicircle in the air, they fell heavily into the water. The little thing opened her eyes wide, trying to see the fish's appearance clearly. However, she found that the fish were red, yellow, blue, and purple. The fish kept jumping from the sea, their colorful fish scales shining brightly under the sunlight. At first glance, it was as if a rainbow bridge had been built on the surface of the sea. Because there were too many fish, they kept jumping out of the sea and then fell back into the sea. As a result, there was a splash sound on the surface of the sea. It was as if it was raining and the sound did not stop. For a moment, the whole world seemed to be lively again. The little thing was stunned. She opened her little mouth for a long time but was unable to say a word. She was very satisfied with her reaction, so he gently patted her and asked with a smile, "How is it? Do you like this magic trick?" "I like it." "Then take a look here." As he spoke, she pointed below the yacht. The little thing stretched her neck and looked down. Only then did she find that there were suddenly many white and fat figures beside the yacht. "Dolphins. It's dolphins." The little thing was excited. As a regular in children's picture books, dolphins were like stars in the eyes of the little thing, so she recognized them at a glance. The dolphins in the sea seemed to have heard her voice, so they immediately raised their heads and nodded at her. "Papa. They're saying hello to me." The little thing had never seen such a scene before. She immediately waved at the dolphins excitedly. The intelligence of dolphins was very high. The intelligence of an adult dolphin was even equivalent to that of a 6 or 7-year-old child. Chapter 350. Go up to the 9 heavens to catch the moon, go down to the 5 seas to catch turtles. The sea was lonely because people couldn't see the bustling world below. The fish built a rainbow bridge and the dolphins nodded at her. Although the trick was simple, it allowed the little girl to see a different sea, and it also calmed her restless heart. Finally, a bright smile appeared on the little girl's face again. She stood on the side of the boat, facing the sun. Her little face was rosy like a ripe apple, looking especially sweet and attractive. When the breeze blew the waves, the crashing sound of the waves was like the most pleasant accompaniment in the world, accompanying the boat as it gradually sailed into the distance. While Shi's family of 3 was busy playing with the dolphins, the distant Diyu Island was also particularly lively. Today was the Jiang clan's Memorial Day. The Jiang clansmen on each island had to come to the main island and line up according to seniority at the foot of Wuxia Peak. Under the leadership of the Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu, they followed the clan leader to worship their ancestors. After many years of reproduction and recuperation, the Jiang clan was thriving, regardless of whether it was the main branch or the side branches. If the main island was compared to a county, then the remaining 16 small islands were the towns and villages under the jurisdiction of the county. Today the Jiang clansmen gathered on the main island of Diyu Island, as if all the people of the county had come to the county. From the dock to the top of Wuxia Peak, it was densely packed with people. Wuxia Peak wasn't high, and a bluestone road led from the top of the mountain to the nearest dock. Those who could stand on the bluestone road were the direct descendants of the Jiang clan, or the senior members of the side branches. And it was precisely because there were too many people that even the beach that would be flooded from time to time was filled with youthful juniors. On the entire island, regardless of whether they were young or old, there was a large ribbon tied around their heads, dressed in blue and black ceremonial robes, and clasped their hands in front of their chests. As long as the bell at the top of the mountain rang, everyone would bow to the top of Wuxia Peak in unison. Dong, dong, the dull and distant sound of the bell continued to ring, startling the birds in the forest and causing them to fly into the sky. They then began to circle around the island. One person bowing might not feel much, but when thousands of people bowed at the same time, it gave off a solemn feeling. It was only when one was in the midst of it that they realized how insignificant they were. And this was the tradition of the Jiang clan. There were a total of 36 chimes. When the last chime rang out, a woman's voice suddenly resounded throughout the entire island. "Now that the ceremony is over, please move to the North Island. Today's banquet will be held there." After hearing this, the solemn scene on the island was no longer as solemn as before. Everyone seemed to have been unshackled. They immediately gathered in groups of 2s and 3s, preparing to head to the North Island for dinner. But then, the woman's voice suddenly sounded again. But this time, her tone was no longer as calm and graceful as before. Instead, it became a little anxious. "Wait. Those of the Yuan generation and above, please wait. The patriarch has something important to discuss with all of you." Hearing this, the people on the island couldn't help but whisper to each other. Above the Yuan generation? That would mean that he was at least a grandfather. Did something big happen in the clan? Because the notice came too suddenly, no one reacted immediately. After the woman urged them again, all the Jiang clan members of the Yuan generation and above turned to climb the serene afterglow peak. On Wuxia Peak, outside the Jiang clan's ancestral hall. During the sacrificial ceremony, people had to keep a certain distance from each other. Now that the sacrificial ceremony was over, the patriarch called everyone over. Naturally, the ancestral hall square was instantly filled with people. Among the people present, the lowest seniority was the same generation as the patriarch Jiang Yuankue. One could imagine how important the matter the patriarch was going to talk about today was. But, after everyone from the Yuan generation and above arrived at the square, everyone learned an important piece of information from the others. The person who summoned everyone was not the patriarch, but the one who had been in seclusion for many years. Many people even thought that he had died long ago, but there was no funeral. Second granduncle Jiang Jingqing. Jiang Jingqing's seniority was extremely high. The reason why he was called second granduncle was not because he was the second son, but because he was not of the direct bloodline. The so-called direct bloodline was the descendant of the first patriarch of the Jiang clan. The general meaning was that if a father had two sons, the eldest son could be called a direct descendant, and the second son could only be called a collateral descendant. Then the eldest son of the eldest son would inherit the title of direct descendant, and the second son would become a collateral descendant. And so on, in order to maintain the purity of the direct bloodline. This kind of thinking might be difficult to understand with the thinking of modern people, but for a large clan like the Jiang clan, preserving the direct bloodline was the most important thing in the clan. This was the clan's rule and also the ancestral teachings. Of course, from Qinshi's point of view, these people were actually a bunch of steely straight men who didn't understand genetics. More and more people gathered in the square. Everyone was discussing in low voices, one after another, so much so that the square was about to become a vegetable market. At this time, a woman who looked to be about 40 years old, but still had her charm intact, quickly walked out of the ancestral hall. The woman looked at the noisy crowd and immediately frowned. Silence. The woman only slightly opened her mouth, but her voice was like a thunderclap, instantly causing everyone's ears to buzz. Where is this place? How can you all be allowed to make a racket here? The woman looked around with a cold face, and wherever her gaze landed, everyone lowered their heads and listened obediently. For a moment, the whole place was so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard. Seeing that no one was talking, the woman stood on the steps outside the ancestral hall, as if she was about to announce something. But just as she opened her mouth before she could make a sound, a white figure suddenly descended from the sky and landed directly beside the huge bronze cauldron in the square. The woman instinctively wanted to scold that person, but when she saw the person's appearance she immediately bowed and said, "Greetings to second granduncle." Hearing this, everyone looked sideways. Then they followed the woman's example, turned around and bowed respectfully to that person, and shouted in unison, "Greetings to second granduncle." This scene was very similar to an ancient emperor going to court. After everyone finished speaking, the second granduncle, who was the center of attention, smiled and said, "Everyone get up. I'm not the clan leader, so why are you so respectful?" "Thank you, second granduncle." After hearing the second granduncle's response, everyone straightened up and looked straight at the ancestral hall. At this time Jiang Yuankue, who had been staying in the ancestral hall, slowly walked out of the main hall as if he had just heard the noise. Although he was the clan leader, his seniority was much lower, so he had to bow respectfully to the second granduncle like everyone else. "Greetings to second granduncle." However, although Jiang Yuankue bowed to the second granduncle did not respond to him. After the second granduncle looked at Jiang Yuankue up and down, he suddenly seemed to think of something and threw out an earth-shattering sentence. "How long have I been in seclusion? Even the clan leader has changed. Is your father dead?" Chapter 351. Is your father dead? Even a stranger wouldn't greet someone's parents like that, let alone an elder in the clan. Therefore, no matter how shrewd Jiang Yuankue was, he couldn't help but change his expression after hearing his words. No matter what, he was still the head of the clan. What was the difference between the seemingly cordial greeting from his second granduncle and slapping his face in public? He simply didn't care about his identity as the head of the clan. The atmosphere instantly became much more oppressive. The sun was still shining brightly, but it gave people the feeling that a storm was coming. On one side was the current head of the Jiang clan. On the other side was the extremely senior and powerful second granduncle. Everyone present was old and experienced. Seeing that the situation wasn't good, they immediately buried their heads and didn't even dare to breathe loudly. They were afraid that the fire at the city gate would affect them. No matter what, Jiang Yuankue was still the head of the clan. Even if he was provoked by his second granduncle, he couldn't lose his composure because of this. Therefore, after taking a deep breath, Jiang Yuankue forcibly suppressed the anger in his heart. Then, he forced a smile and said to his second granduncle, "Thank you for your concern, second granduncle. My father's health is still good." He's currently deducing the way of the celestial being with many ancestors on Heron Island? Hearing this, his second granduncle suddenly chuckled. As if he thought of something, he first shook his head. Then, as if he was talking to himself, he casually muttered, "A bunch of old farts." Although his voice was soft, everyone present wasn't a cultivator. How could this sentence escape their ears? However, everyone acted as if they didn't hear it. Even the woman who had signaled for everyone to be silent seemed to have lost her hearing. She stood in front of the ancestral hall with her head lowered and her eyes looking straight ahead. Everyone present was silent. Jiang Yuankui frowned and remained silent for a while. Finally, he raised his head and said in a slightly cold tone, "Second granduncle, you've just come out of seclusion and you're already in a hurry to call the clan meeting. May I ask if there's something you want to discuss with everyone?" As he spoke, Jiang Yuankui deliberately emphasized the word, old. It was probably to remind his second granduncle that he was the one who should die of old age the most on Daiyu Island. In fact, Jiang Jingqing, who was respectfully called second granduncle, was not old at all. Judging from his appearance, he didn't look like an old man at all. He looked like a young man in his early 30s who could almost be considered a youth. Over 200 years had passed, yet the old fellow had actually relied on his extraordinary cultivation to allow him to return to his youth, and he was like a sick tree that had come back to life and revealed extremely exuberant vitality once more. How could this not cause others to arouse reverence towards him? When Earth's heaven and Earth's spirit chi was so scarce, the Jiang clan's collateral branch still gave birth to such a stunning figure. It had to be said that this was the Jiang clan's fortune. However, at the same time, this was also the tragedy of the Jiang clan's direct descendants. The direct descendants of the Jiang family had the best resources on Daiyu Island, but none of them were comparable to the second granduncle. That was why Jiang Yuankui was being bullied by the second granduncle, and he could only swallow his pride and swallow his pride. Jiang Jingqing appeared to be standing on the ground, but in reality he was still several inches away from the ground. After hearing Jiang Yuankui's words, he suddenly laughed out loud. Then he flew straight to the top of the bronze cauldron and looked down at the crowd in the square from above. Looking at the solemn hall and the useless fellows in the square, Jiang Jingqing's heart was suddenly filled with pride. He couldn't help but roar out loud. "Riches and honor are like a dream, all roots are not lacking, but true faith is hard to come by. Worth as much as it comes to hear the wondrous method, not as rare as the superior Sirius epiphyllum?" Everyone thinks that the superior Sirius epiphyllum is a legendary item, but they don't know that on our Daiyu Island, there is a budding superior Sirius epiphyllum that has been nurtured for 3,000 years. When he heard the word superior Sirius epiphyllum, Jiang Yuankui's face immediately darkened. Seeing that second granduncle seemed to want to continue, Jiang Yuankui no longer cared about anything else. He couldn't help but shout angrily, "How dare you, second granduncle?" Hearing this, Jiang Jingqing seemed to have heard a joke and couldn't help but laugh wildly. Ha! His laughter was like a thunderclap, instantly resounding throughout the entire serene afterglow peak, then gradually spread out and finally reached the ears of everyone on the island. Everyone was preparing to go to the North Island to eat when they suddenly heard such laughter, so they quickly turned back to look at serene afterglow peak. Many of the bolder ones even dashed madly towards serene afterglow peak. They had already made up their minds that even if they would be punished by the discipline hall, they would still go up the mountain today to watch the show. Jiang Jingqing laughed for a long time. While he was laughing, he was also releasing an invisible pressure to the surroundings. Those with lower cultivation bases in the crowd couldn't bear this pressure and directly knelt on the ground. Even Jiang Yuankui was forced to release his true qi to try to resist this pressure. Jiang Jingqing's laughter came to an abrupt end. After sweeping his gaze over the crowd, Jiang Jingqing finally set his gaze on Jiang Yuankui. Then he slowly opened his mouth and said, "When the old ancestor left, he planted this Adumbra flower and left behind a prophecy. This flower belongs to the destined person. 3,000 years have passed and this superior Sirius epiphyllum has also welcomed its time to bloom." Then this old man would like to ask, "Who is the destined person for this superior Sirius epiphyllum? Is it you? Is it you? Or is it you?" As he spoke, Jiang Jingqing stretched out his hand and pointed at the Jiang clan members below. When they saw this, the few people he pointed at immediately knelt on the ground, and said with flattering expressions, "Second granduncle is now the most powerful person in the Jiang clan, so you must be the destined person for this superior Sirius epiphyllum." That's right. The Jiang clan has been passed down for more than 3,000 years, and coincidentally second granduncle was born, so this superior serious epiphyllum finally welcomed its flowering. I believe second granduncle is the destined person for this flower. This flower is blessed by the ancestor and blessed by the heavens. Jiang Yuankue stood in front of the ancestral hall's doors and watched as these people echoed Jiang Jingqing's words. His expression was as ugly as it could be. The superior serious epiphyllum was a rare treasure left behind by the Jiang clan's ancestors, and there was only one of it in the world. Although he had already expected second granduncle to be interested in this superior serious epiphyllum, he did not expect second granduncle to be so direct. He did not even have the slightest intention of hiding it. He was just short of directly going to Heron Island and plucking this flower. He was extremely arrogant. While Jiang Yuankue was furious, a yacht passed through Daiyu Island's mountain guarding array without any hindrance and headed straight for the main island. Qin Shi stood at the bow of the yacht, and after looking up at serene afterglow peak in the distance, the corners of his mouth suddenly curled into a faint smile. Chapter 352. The sunset glow was always extremely beautiful. At the end of the sea, a huge kumquat-like setting sun stood above the horizon of the evening. A thin mist held up the perfectly round reddish gold. Looking from afar, there was only this shining golden wheel left at the intersection of the sea and the sky. As the golden wheel continued to fall, the orange-red sky was gradually dyed with some indigo, blurring Daiyu Island's figure in the sunset glow. This scene was extremely similar to the beautiful artistic conception described by Bai Juyi in the Song of the Mu River. The setting sun spreads out on the water, half of the river is red, and the other half is red. Unfortunately, although the setting sun was beautiful, it always gave people a feeling of loneliness. Perhaps it was because she had been on the boat for too long. The little girl was curled up on the sofa and fiddling with her phone in boredom. When Qin Ruoying brought a peeled apple to her mouth, she opened her mouth lazily and slowly took a bite. Looking at the cute way her little mouth puffed up, coupled with her salted fish-like expression, this little thing was just short of hanging a sign around her neck with the words, "Nothing to live for," written on it. Suddenly, the little thing seemed to have heard something. She sat up from the sofa and leaned against the railing, stretching her neck to look around. Whoa! Looking at the Daiyu Islands that suddenly appeared in front of her, the little thing's eyes suddenly widened. Mama! An island! There's an island here! The island that suddenly appeared was like a power bank, instantly charging the little thing who had been on standby for a long time. Mama, I want to go there to play. As she spoke, the little thing couldn't wait to jump off the sofa and step up the stairs to leave the balcony. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying could only put down the fruit in her hand and follow her to the bow deck. Qin Shi was looking at the top of Qixia Peak thoughtfully. Seeing this, the little thing timidly crept toward him. This little thing was mischievous. It wanted to scare Qin Shi, but it didn't expect that its little trick had already been seen through by Qin Shi. Therefore, when she came behind Qin Shi and was about to open her mouth to make a sound, Qin Shi reached her first and lifted her up from the ground. Nyan, you've got guts. You even dare to come and scare Daddy? Qin Shi held her in his arms and shook her a few times, but it was as if he had poked the little thing's laughing acupoint. Immediately she let out a series of giggles. After the father and daughter played around for a while, the little fellow leaned on Qin Shi's shoulder, pointed to Daiyu Island and said coquettishly, "Papa, can we go up and play? Of course, when the boat docks, Daddy will take you up to have some fun." After hearing Qin Shi's affirmative answer, the little fellow excitedly gestured for Qin Shi to put her down. Then she ran to the railing and looked at Daiyu Island in front of her. But as she looked, she realized that there was something wrong with this place. Because there were people on the island and there were many of them. These people stood on the shore and kept pointing at the boat. As the boat approached, the surrounding scenery and the expressions on the people's faces became clearer. The little fellow was not used to the feeling of being the center of attention. When she realized that everyone was looking at her, she quickly jumped back into Qin Shi's arms and shrunk her head, unwilling to show herself. Looking at the boat slowly docked at the dock of the main island, the Jiang clansmen present were very surprised. Because many of the Jiang clansmen had never seen a boat before, when they suddenly saw such a gorgeous boat, they couldn't help but surround it and start whispering to each other. It was not that there were no foreign boats on Daiyu Island, but they were still very few. So, many of the Jiang clansmen had only heard about it, but had never seen it with their own eyes. This boat, it was indeed very beautiful. Today was the Jiang clan ceremony, so most of the Jiang clansmen had come to the main island. Because this was the first time they saw a living outsider, they naturally felt like they were watching a giant panda. Outsider? How rare. After securing the boat's anchor, She carried the little fellow in one arm and held Qin Ruoying in the other. Just like that, they slowly disembarked from the boat under everyone's gaze. The little fellow was afraid of strangers, so she buried her head in Shi's shoulder and peeked her head out from time to look around. Her cowering expression made her look like a frightened ostrich. After all, this was someone else's territory, so She stood at the dock and waited for a while. Then, a man who looked to be in his 30s quickly walked up to them. The man saw that Shi's family of 3 did not look like bad people, so he could not figure out Shi's background. After all, there was a large array around Daiyu Island, so outsiders could not find the location of Daiyu Island. Since these 3 people could enter the island, they must have been invited by the people on the island. Out of this consideration, the man's tone carried some politeness. He asked politely, "Today is the day of our Jiang clan's ceremony. May I ask why Sir has come to the island?" Hearing that, Shi also replied politely, "I was invited by the clan leader to attend the banquet today. Please lead the way, sir." Invited by the clan leader? After hearing Shi's reply, the man could not help but be stunned for a moment. He really did not know what to do. He was not in charge of reception in the first place. The reason why he came to ask was because the Yuan generation and above had all gone to Wuxia Peak. There were not many people in the port who were older than him. A clan meeting was being held on Wuxia Peak, but this person in front of him said that he was invited by the clan leader to attend the meeting. Thinking of this, the man could not help but look troubled. Seeing this, Shi added with a serious expression, "I was invited by the clan leader to attend the meeting. The clan leader must have his reasons for choosing today. If Sir doesn't know much about this, please lead the way and let me meet the clan leader first." Shi's words were methodical, but in fact, he didn't even know the name of the Jiang clan leader, so how could he have received an invitation from the clan leader? He just casually made up a story, but he did not expect this young man to not have the slightest doubt. How fast was Shi's reaction? Seeing the other party's reaction, of course, he had to take advantage of the situation and fool him. He was prepared to meet the clan leader first. Anyway, he was not afraid of being kicked out. "Alright, please follow me, sir." Perhaps it was because Shi was holding the child, so the man was not less wary of him. After thinking for a moment, he turned sideways and made a gesture of invitation. "Thank you, sir." Then the family of 3 slowly climbed up Wuxia Peak along the stone path in the mountain under the guidance of the man. The little fellow poked her head out and kept looking at the surrounding Jiang clan members. She seemed to be very curious about their clothes, but because these people were all looking at her, she did not make a sound. The little fellow was afraid of strangers. Finally, the man led Shi's family to the top of the mountain. After the family of 3 came to the edge of the square, the little fellow noticed that the atmosphere in this place seemed to be a bit wrong, so she raised her head curiously and began to look around. But when she put her eyes on the center of the square, her little red mouth immediately opened into an O shape. Chapter 353. That person was flying in the sky. The crisp and melodious child's voice also carried a kind of surprise and curiosity. But the moment this sentence sounded, it was no less than throwing a grenade in everyone's ears. With a bang sound, everyone present was shocked. Everyone couldn't help but look back. When they saw the little guy who suddenly made the noise, their eyes showed a bit of a blank look. Where did this child come from? This scene was very similar to a middle school class, when the teacher was leading everyone to recite classical Chinese. The whole class was reading excitedly, but there was an untactful student who rushed into the classroom with a piece of bread in his mouth, directly interrupting everyone's recitation. When everyone stopped to watch a good show, they shockingly discovered that this student who was late was not in their class at all. The students were dumbfounded. What kind of experience would it be to be a teacher? If Jiang Jingqing was the teacher, then Shi's family was naturally the late students. The Jiang clan attached great importance to the ancestral rules. Not to mention that the Wuxia Peak was holding a clan meeting. Even in normal times, the ancestral square was not a place where just anyone could come. The man who led the way was still too young. When he saw that the atmosphere in the square was a bit strange, he froze in place and didn't know what to do. What else could he do? Interrupting the clan meeting caused all the elders to look back at him. Could it be that he had to brace himself and bring the outsider to the clan leader at this time? He really didn't have the guts. Seeing the man standing there in a daze, an old man next to him couldn't help but scold him in a low voice. "Fengla, what are you doing? Hurry up and take him away." Hearing this, the man named Jiang Fengla suddenly realized what was going on. He hurriedly bowed in the direction of Jiang Yuankue, and then tried to pull Qin Shi away in a fluster. But how could Qin Shi be so easy to get close to? Jiang Fengle just stretched out his hand, but it was as if he touched an air wall. No matter how hard he tried, his hand couldn't move forward an inch. Seeing this, Jiang Fengle couldn't help but be anxious. He couldn't help but roar in a low voice, "Hey, what are you doing? Come with me and get out of here." Jiang Fengle was so anxious that he was sweating, but Qin Shi turned a deaf ear to this. He raised his head and glanced at Jiang Jingqing, who was in midair. Then he held the little girl in one hand and Qin Ruoying in the other and slowly walked to the center of the square as if he was taking a stroll. "I'm really sorry to have disturbed you all. If I had known that you were having a meeting, I would have waited at the foot of the mountain for a while. But since I'm already here, it's not like I can go back now. Why don't you all take a break first and continue the discussion later?" As they walked, Qin Shi kept nodding to the Jiang clan members on both sides. He seemed to be walking very slowly, but in fact, in just a few words, he had passed through the huge square and arrived at the steps outside the ancestral hall. Towards the stranger who had suddenly appeared, Jiang Yuankui was also very puzzled. He glanced at Jiang Jingqing's expression from the corner of his eye, only to find that Jiang Jingqing didn't seem to recognize this person either. This was strange. Second great uncle had cornered everyone and tried to force him to hand over the Adumbra flower. This was the most critical moment, so why would a stranger suddenly appear? Moreover, this person seemed to have brought his wife and child with him. What was he trying to do? Jiang Yuankui frowned and didn't say anything. The whole place was silent. Even Jiang Jingqing, who was in the sky, couldn't help but look down at Qin Shi. Under such a situation where everyone was watching, the little girl in Qin Shi's arms suddenly made a sound. They saw that she was leaning on Qin Shi's shoulder and looking up at Jiang Jingqing for a while. In the end, she couldn't help but ask in a low voice, "Papa, why can he fly?" Her voice was very soft, but it reached everyone's ears without missing a word. "That uncle is fixing the electric pole. In fact, he has a rope hanging on his back. Because it's too far away, you can't see the rope, so you think he's flying?" "Oh, I know. Because it's too far away, the things I see are very, very small. So small that I can't see them." Qin Shi smiled and pinched the tip of her nose, and then explained in a low voice. After understanding the reason, the little girl couldn't help but grin. However, she had just laughed a few times when she suddenly saw the woman on the steps give her a fierce glare. There was undisguised disgust in the woman's eyes. The little girl, who had never been glared at like this, was a little scared on the spot. So, the little girl suddenly shrank back into Qin Shi's arms like a frightened quail and didn't dare to show her head again. Seeing the father and daughter whispering as if there was no one else around, the woman on the steps couldn't bear it anymore, so she stepped forward and scolded Qin Shi harshly, "How dare you? This is the forbidden area of the Jiang clan's ancestral temple. How can an outsider be trespassed? Why aren't you taking him away?" With the woman's order, many clansmen of the Jiang clan belonging to the commandment hall immediately rushed out of the ancestral temple, showing that they were going to take down Qin Shi and his family. But at this time, Qin Shi suddenly turned his head and looked around. After confirming that Jiang Yuankui was the person with the highest status, he looked at him and asked calmly, "May I ask if you are the current clan leader of the Jiang clan?" Jiang Yuankui's face was cold and he didn't answer. Qin Shi reached out and touched the back of the little girl's head. After letting the little girl lean on his shoulder, he said lightly, "I came uninvited today mainly to ask for an explanation from you." "Ask for an explanation?" As soon as he said this, Jiang Yuankui reached out and stopped the crowd. He frowned and asked, "What explanation?" "A few days ago, someone came to your island to ask for advice about the Si Ming Xiannu. May I ask if clan leader Jiang has any impression of this?" After hearing this, Jiang Yuankui's heart suddenly thumped, and there was a subtle change in the way he looked at Qin Shi. The person in front of him, could it be the legendary Mr. Qin? So young? But why did he choose to come to the island today? It was too sudden. Jiang Yuankui was shocked and doubtful. He really couldn't figure out Qin Shi's identity, but he still pretended to be calm and didn't show any abnormalities. After sneaking a glance at Jiang Jingqing in the sky, Jiang Yuankui suddenly had some thoughts in his mind. So after a light cough, he looked at Qin Shi and said in a low voice, "There is indeed such a thing. I'm very sorry that I can't answer his questions. But you have to understand that the Jiang clan only accepted outsiders out of friendship and definitely not out of duty. If you blame me because of this, isn't it a bit unreasonable?" Jiang Yuankui put on a righteous look. It seemed that he really wanted to reason with Qin Shi. However, after hearing this, Qin Shi couldn't help but laugh. He then replied coldly, Whether I help you or not, I naturally won't blame you because of this. But do you know, that person is my father-in-law? Hearing this, even with Jiang Yuankui's shrewdness, he couldn't help but narrow his eyes slightly. It's really him. After confirming Qin Shi's identity, Jiang Yuankui was suddenly happy and almost laughed out loud. There was an old saying, it's better to come at the right time than to come early. He didn't think that such a good thing would actually happen to him. There would be a good show to watch in a while. Jiang Yuankui resisted the urge to laugh in his heart. He was like an old fox that had become a spirit, standing on the stairs, only his tail was not exposed. Qin Shi felt that something was wrong with him, but didn't think too much about it. So he continued to say, Mr. Father-in-law came here from Shangjing with a heart full of sincerity, just to ask the Jiang clan to answer his questions. But not only did you not help, you even hurt him, then why don't you tell me? Chapter 354. Ask for an explanation. Who is this guy? He's so arrogant, isn't he afraid of biting his tongue? As soon as Qin Shi finished speaking, everyone couldn't help but start whispering to each other. At this time, Jiang Jingqing, who had been flying in the air, suddenly seemed to have thought of something. He instantly descended from the sky and appeared in front of Qin Shi. Jiang Jingqing frowned and looked at Qin Shi, then suddenly asked, You're the so-called Mr. Qin? Hearing this, Qin Shi looked at him up and down, then slowly replied, I don't know who the Mr. Qin you're talking about is, but my surname is Qin. After hearing this answer, Jiang Jingqing suddenly felt like he had discovered a new continent. He couldn't help but nod and chuckle. Ha, interesting. Jiang Jingqing put on a look of interest. But what he didn't expect was, Qin Shi didn't have any intention of paying attention to him. Seeing that Jiang Jingqing was blocking his line of sight, Qin Shi slightly tilted his head, walked past Jiang Jingqing and said to Jiang Yuankui, who was on the stairs, Leader Jiang, I'll be honest with you. If you don't give me an explanation today, then I'll have to give you one. His tone sounded very casual, like he was chatting with a friend. There was no aggression in his tone. However, the meaning behind his words was a little aggressive, and there was a feeling of being unforgiving when he was in the right. But, as the leader of the Jiang family, Jiang Yuankui didn't immediately respond after being questioned by Qin Shi in such a rude manner. This was because he knew that with his second granduncle's arrogant personality, he would definitely jump out to take the blame. As expected. The result was just as Jiang Yuankui expected. As soon as Qin Shi finished speaking, Jiang Jingqing, who was already annoyed at being ignored, immediately snorted and said coldly, Humph, I want to know, what kind of explanation are you going to give me? After hearing this, Qin Shi finally saw Jiang Jingqing. After slowly shifting his gaze from Jiang Yuankui to Jiang Jingqing, Qin Shi frowned and said, It's you. Hearing this, Jiang Jingqing laughed out loud as if he had heard a joke. Even though Daiyu Island is isolated, it's very well informed. Mr. Qin rose like a comet. In just a year, his reputation has spread throughout Wuxia and even the entire cultivation world. A few days ago, Mr. Qin cut down Su Feng of the Dark Ghost sect in front of countless people at the peak of Taiheng. Such a miraculous skill, how is it different from the land immortals? There are rumors that Wu Lian even wanted to give the long-vacant chief seat to Mr. Qin, but he was rejected by Mr. Qin. At this point, Jiang Jingqing looked at the little guy in Qin Shi's arms with a faint smile, then continued, This old man has lived for hundreds of years, and this is the first time I've seen such an amazing person. Naturally, I can't help but yearn for it. Today I've seen it for myself. This old man suddenly understands what it means by seeing is believing. I don't think anyone would believe that the famous Mr. Qin is actually a midwife who doesn't forget to carry his child wherever he goes. Ha ha. By the end of his sentence, Jiang Jingqing was already out of breath from laughing, as if the words Mr. Qin were the biggest joke in the world. The term midwife had to be mentioned here. The midwife system was a special product of a matriarchal society. Not only did it exist in Wuxia, but even the Indians living in the Amazon River once had such a custom. The so-called midwife system was that during a woman's childbirth, a man would be on the side to simulate the wife's childbirth, and after the wife gave birth, he would replace the wife to go through confinement. The real pregnant woman had to go out to work after giving birth to the child, and she also had to take care of the husband who was in confinement. This was because, when human civilization was just born, women were the masters and men had to obey women. Later, as the status of men gradually increased, the entire social system began to change from a matriarchal society to a patriarchal society. Men wanted to replace women in everything, including the ability to give birth to children. That was why the midwife system was created. It was just to prove that men could do everything that women could do, and they could even do it better. From today's perspective, this kind of behavior was indeed absurd. But from a historical perspective, men trying to replace women to give birth to children was actually a symbol of the progress of human civilization. The replacement of the matriarchal system by the patriarchal system was a major advancement in the history of human civilization. In summary, Jiang Jingqing was actually beating around the bush to humiliate Qin Shi. The Jiang family members present naturally understood Jiang Jingqing's words. They did not have a good impression of this outsider who had suddenly appeared. Seeing that their second granduncle had expressed his opinion, of course, they had to agree with him and humiliate him as if they were looking at a monkey. Therefore there was a burst of enthusiastic laughter in the square. Looking at their exaggerated expressions, it seemed that they were competing to see who could laugh louder. Jiang Yunkui stood on the steps and silently scanned the crowd. He did not laugh and he did not dare to laugh. In fact, Qin Yongyan was indeed injured by his second granduncle. But, if he had not played a trick, how would Jiang Jingqing, who had just come out of seclusion, know that Mr. Chen's father-in-law had come to Daiyu Island? As the head of the family, Jiang Yuankui's cultivation was far inferior to Jiang Jingqing's. But in other aspects, even 10 Jiang Zenkings could not compare to 1 Jiang Yuankui. Jiang Jingqing had used the Jiang family's secret method to survive for hundreds of years. It was only recently that he found a glimmer of hope due to the revival of spirit qi. To this amazingly talented second granduncle, a cultivator like Mr. Chen who had appeared out of nowhere was nothing. The old man had been silent for a long time and needed to use a heavy drum to announce his name to the outside world. As for Mr. Chen, it was obviously a heavy drum of excellent quality. As long as this drum was beaten, Jiang Jingqing's name would be known throughout the cultivation world from then on. His name would be known throughout the world like thunder. Although the timing of Qin Shi's appearance was somewhat unexpected, everything was still within Jiang Jingqing's control. The only thing that made him a little uneasy was Mr. Qin a match for his second granduncle? Although Su Feng had broken through to the diviner level, in Jiang Yuankui's eyes, Su Feng did not deserve the title of being above the diviner level because of the dark ghost sect's inferior inheritance. Presumably Jiang Jingqing thought so as well. Therefore Jiang Yuankui did not even hope that Qin Shi could hurt Jiang Jingqing at all. He only hoped that Qin Shi could last 100 rounds against Jiang Jingqing. Only in this way could his plan continue to be carried out, Jiang Yuankui silently calculated in his mind. But unfortunately, in the end he had miscalculated one thing. Qin Shi was not only an outsider but also a mudslide. A mudslide powerful enough to flatten Daiyu Island. Old bastard. Although Qin Shi did not think there was anything wrong with a man taking care of a child, Jiang Jingqing's attitude had successfully provoked his anger. Therefore, after coldly spitting out these 3 words, Qin Shi suddenly raised his right hand, and then, he used his fingers as a sword and pointed to the sky. At the foot of Qixia Peak. Many of the Jiang family's juniors who had never seen a yacht before were crowding the dock to watch. Suddenly, a green light shot out from the yacht. Like lightning, in the blink of an eye, this green light had flown to the top of Rosy Dawn Peak. Then, a voice that sounded like the whispers of a deity suddenly rang out and spread to every corner of the island in an instant. Chapter 355. The yacht was right below Qixia Peak. When the green light shot out of the yacht, it almost instantly reached the peak of Qixia Peak. Jiang Jingqing was standing about 4 or 5 meters away from Qin Shi. Seeing that Qin Shi had suddenly turned hostile and attacked, a half-smile suddenly appeared on his face. For someone as arrogant as Jiang Jingqing, the only reason he didn't attack Qin Shi directly was that he wanted to retreat in order to advance. After all, Daiyu Island was the territory of the Jiang clan. If he directly attacked Qin Shi, an outsider, even if he won in the end, others would think that he was bullying Qin Shi by outnumbering him and had an unfair advantage. But if Qin Shi made the first move and forced him to fight back, who would dare to say half a word of gossip? As long as he defeated Mr. Qin fair and square, he, Jiang Jingqing, would be the undisputed #1 person in the world, enough to become the chief of the Wu Lian clan. It had to be said that Jiang Jingqing's idea was very good. As far as Jiang Jingqing knew, cultivators would more or less have some way to hide their aura. Just like in martial arts novels, the lighter one's footsteps were, the higher one's martial arts skills were. Because everything a cultivator owned came from the spiritual qi of heaven and earth. To estimate a person's true cultivation level, one only needed to look at the fluctuation of spiritual qi around the person. When a cultivator stood still, their aura hiding technique could cover most of the fluctuation of spiritual qi. So even if she didn't have any fluctuation of spiritual qi, Jiang Jingqing didn't find it strange at all. But, when the green light streaked across the sky like a bolt of lightning, Jiang Jingqing suddenly realized that he might have thought too simply of the situation. The green light was only 3 feet long, but in the process of flying, it was like a meteor streaking across the sky, leaving behind a slender green thread in the dusk sky. Look, what's that? The appearance of the green light immediately attracted everyone's attention. Immediately after, a sentence suddenly popped up in the minds of many well-informed Jiang clan clansmen: the peak of Taihang flying immortal with one sword. A flying sword? This man is really Mr. Qin. Before the crowd had time to be surprised, the green light was like a bolt of lightning, striking down on Jiang Jingqing, who was in the middle of the square. In the process of chopping down, an extremely surging wave of spirit qi suddenly erupted from the green light. Then, with the green light as the tip of the cone, a cone-shaped aura field visible to the naked eye instantly formed. However, in an instant the green light was like a huge drill, smashing down with an unstoppable momentum. After feeling the huge amount of energy contained in the green light, Jiang Jingqing's expression couldn't help but change slightly. He no longer looked as arrogant as before. He had really been careless this time. Seeing the ferocious green light, Jiang Jingqing could only quickly raise his arms in an attempt to block the sword. Therefore, just as the green light was about to hit Jiang Jingqing, a dazzling golden light immediately appeared around him. The 6 trigram lines calming mind, embracing the yuan and guarding one. From afar, Jiang Jingqing looked like he was trapped in a golden egg. As for the green light, it was like a high-speed rotating drill bit that directly crashed into the shell of the egg. Bang! As soon as the two came into contact, an extremely dazzling light lit up the top of Qixia Peak. The light was so bright that it almost lit up half of the sky. The collision of the moves set off an intense turbulence, so much so that a cyclone of energy suddenly appeared in the middle of the square. The cyclone spun wildly, and the strong traction force shattered everything around it. It uprooted the square's floor and the surrounding trees, and then lifted them all into the sky. Facing such a powerful wave of energy, even Jiang Yuankui had no choice but to quickly retreat into the ancestral hall, not to mention the other Jiang clansmen present. Among them, the weaker ones were almost instantly lifted into the sky by this cyclone, and then heavily smashed to the foot of the mountain. If it weren't for the protection of the Jiang clan's ancestral hall, it would probably be turned into ruins in this storm. Finally, the storm gradually subsided. Although it was still a scene of flying sand and rolling stones, and the sky was dark, some things could still be vaguely seen. Jiang Yuankui hid in the ancestral hall. At this moment there was only one thought left in his mind: it's over. Just from the momentum of this sword, Jiang Yuankui realized that he and Jiang Yuankui might have been wrong. This Mr. Qin in front of him was definitely not a soft persimmon, and it was even more impossible for him to become a stepping stone for the Jiang clan. One had to know that no matter how he and Jiang Jingqing fought, they were both clan relatives with the same blood flowing in their bodies, so no matter who won or lost, it was acceptable for the entire Jiang clan. But if Jiang Jingqing was killed by Mr. Qin today, the fall of a heavenly man was unacceptable for Jiang Yuankui and even the entire Jiang clan. Therefore, after coming back to his senses, Jiang Yuankui almost instantly rushed out of the ancestral hall, and then shouted toward the square, "Stop! It's all a misunderstanding. Please stop, both of you. Let's talk nicely." Jiang Yuankui roared at the top of his lungs. He was really afraid that the two of them would really fight to the death, and if they really had to fight to the death, how would he end it then? However, when the energy dissipated and the dust settled, Jiang Yuankui suddenly realized Jiang Jingqing was actually still flying around the square. As for that green light, it was like a cat playing with a mouse hanging behind Jiang Jingqing at a distance, and from time to time, it would stick to Jiang Jingqing to scare him. What was going on? Jiang Yuankui was stunned by what was happening in front of him. The reality was not what he thought at all. How was this a lose-lose situation? Looking at the situation, it seemed that second granduncle was beaten up unilaterally. In fact, before Qin made his move, he had already set up a small illusion array around himself. So what the little fellow saw was different from what others saw. In the little fellow's eyes, the square was still the square, and the strange uncle was still the strange uncle. However, the strange uncle in front of her was like a swing, constantly floating around in the air. Seeing this, the little fellow could not help but ask in confusion, "Papa, what is that uncle doing?" "Oh look, that uncle violated the rules when he was fixing the electric pole," causing the rope at one end to loosen so he can't maintain his balance in the air and can only swing around in the air. Yin, don't think that this is fun. Think about it, this is such a high place, what if he accidentally falls? Would he be like Zhu Zi and turn into a pile of mud? So, don't climb so high in the future, it's very dangerous, do you understand? As she controlled the green light to chase after Jiang Jingqin, he did not forget to educate the little fellow. The little fellow originally thought that swinging in the air was very interesting, but after hearing Shi's vivid description, a nervous expression appeared on her little face. She quickly shook her head and muttered, I know. I don't want to climb so high. Good girl. Shi smiled and rubbed the little fellow's head, then looked at Jiang Yuankui. After looking Jiang Yuankui up and down, he suddenly laughed. Misunderstanding? Hearing this, Jiang Yuankui immediately nodded like he was pounding garlic and hurriedly replied, Yes, Mr. Qin, this is all a misunderstanding, please be magnanimous. Alright, if you say it's a misunderstanding, then it's a misunderstanding. Before Jiang Yuankui could finish his sentence, Shi directly interrupted him. However, right after that, Shi looked thoughtfully at Jiang Jingqin, who was being chased by the green light, and then suddenly asked, Leader Jiang, Daiyu Island is so remote, I wonder if you've seen a movie? Movie? What movie? Young and Dangerous. Jiang Yuankui was stunned for a moment, completely unable to understand what Shi was talking about. Seeing his confused look, Shi did not keep him in suspense and directly explained with a smile, There's a line in Young and Dangerous that I really like. You have to keep your word when you're out there. If I said that I'm going to kill your whole family, then I must kill your whole family. Since I said that I'm going to send him on his way, I naturally can't go back on my words. Don't you think so? As soon as he finished speaking. Chapter 356. Jiang Jingqin took Shi's sword head-on, and his protective shield was shattered almost instantly. After the surging sword energy entered his body, Jiang Jingqin's vitality was greatly damaged, and he almost died on the spot. If it weren't for Jiang Jingqin's high cultivation level, and the vitality in his body was much stronger than Su Feng's, Shi's sword would have sent him straight to the afterlife. After narrowly escaping death, Jiang Jingqin's first reaction was to run as far as he could, but that green light followed him closely like a maggot in a tarsal bone, and he couldn't shake it off no matter how hard he tried. His current wretched appearance perfectly reflected those 8 words. The peak of Taixing, flying immortal with one sword. In fact, from the moment the green light appeared, the 3 words Mr. Qin were destined to resound throughout the cultivation world of Wuxia. Unfortunately, there were always people who thought that seeing was believing and hearing was false. They had to witness it with their own eyes to truly understand what it meant by, when 3 people walk together, one is bound to learn from the other. Jiang Jingqin was such an example. Although Mr. Qin cut down Su Feng at the peak of Taixing, Jiang Jingqin would always think that Mr. Qin was no match for him if he hadn't fought him personally. After all, the blood of the Jiang clan flowed in his body, and he cultivated the most complete, immortal method. Su Feng was a higher diviner after all. No matter how weak he was, he should have been able to last 3 to 5 rounds, right? But Su Feng couldn't even take one move from Mr. Qin, and Jiang Jingqin admitted that he couldn't do that, so he couldn't imagine that there was someone in this world who could defeat a higher diviner with one move. How was that possible? Was there something fishy going on? Maybe it was a trap set up by Su Feng and Mr. Qin, and their purpose was to elevate Mr. Qin's status so that the entire cultivation world of Wuxia would follow his lead, just like how the leaders of the martial arts world were elected in Wuxia novels. Therefore, when Jiang Jingqin heard that Mr. Chen's father-in-law had come to Daiyu Island, he disregarded his status and injured Qin Yongyan. His purpose was to force Mr. Qin to show up and fight with him. To be honest, Jiang Jingqin's thought process was somewhat similar. This girl can afford such an expensive bag. She must be a mistress. He was able to open his own company at such a young age. It's all thanks to his parents. He won at the starting line from the moment he was born. Who knows what kind of shady business he's doing behind the scenes when he's earning so much money? In this regard, She only wanted to say one thing to him. Is it that difficult to admit that others are better than you? This was a fundamental difference. Even though She had only recovered 70% of his strength, there was still a huge gap between him and Jiang Jingqin. The two of them could not be compared at all. Of course, this gap was actually the gap between Earth and Heavenly Spiral. It did not mean that Jiang Jingqin was really useless. Therefore, even though Shi's cultivation had long since surpassed the entire Earth, He would not be arrogant and condescending because of this. It was better to be humble as a person. However, since Jiang Jingqing was determined to court death, Qin Shi naturally would not show mercy. Otherwise, how could he account to Ying? His father-in-law was being bullied. As a son-in-law, he naturally had to stand up for him. Therefore, no matter how Jiang Yuankui tried to smooth things over, Qin Shi turned a blind eye to it. Today he was determined to kill Jiang Jingqing on the spot. However, what Qin Shi did not expect was, the moment the flying sword shot into Jiang Jingqing's back, a burst of white light suddenly appeared on Jiang Jingqing's body. At the same time, a deep and old voice suddenly sounded on the island. Since he is powerless to resist, I hope that Mr. Qin can be merciful on account of your wife and spare his life for the time being. After the old man's voice sounded, the bronze cauldron that had been standing in the middle of the square started to tremble slightly. Immediately after, a golden light suddenly shot out from the bronze cauldron. The light shot straight into the sky. It was as if a crack had been torn open in the dusky sky in an instant. Under the contrast of the golden light, one could even clearly see the rolling clouds in the sky. Seeing this, Qin Shi could not help but frown as he looked at the bronze cauldron in the middle of the square. A faint sneer appeared on his face. It was really similar. After the golden light shot into the sky, a fluorescent golden barrier opened up like an umbrella, instantly enveloping the 17 small islands. The sky suddenly lit up, and the array was activated. For so many years the Jiang clan had never truly activated the array. Now that it was suddenly activated, everyone was immediately scared out of their wits, so much so that the island was full of panicked shouts. Seeing that the other party had suddenly assumed such a posture, Qin Shi gently handed the little fellow in his arms to Qin Ruoying, then waved his hand towards the sky. Then, the green light flew straight back to his hand as if it had a mind of its own. Since the other party wanted to fight, then he could only accompany them to the end. After all, it was not certain who was afraid of whom. You are the ones who are stirring up trouble, and you are also the ones who want to make peace. You dare to come to this broken place and everything is up to you? Is there really such a good thing in the world? You can't really think, this broken array can stop me? After responding coldly to the sky, Qin Shi held the long sword in his hand and turned to look at Jiang Jingqing, who had just fallen from the sky and was now lying on the ground, panting heavily. Because of the protection of the array, the sword just now did not directly kill him. However, it did not matter. At most, he would just follow up with another strike. Thus, Qin Shi raised his right hand and prepared to strike again. However, at this moment, the old man's voice rang out once more. The Jiang family has no intention of making you an enemy, so this array only has the effect of defense and does not have the ability to kill. This child, Jingqing, has been arrogant since he was young. It is inevitable that he would look down on the heroes of the world. I hope that you will not lower yourself to his level. Sir, the name Yamasaro has been passed down for a long time. I'm sure you have some experience in refining medicine. Now that rare treasures are hard to find, there are many people who want to refine a spiritual medicine but cannot find the right ingredients. Recently, there happened to be a ginseng flower on Diyu Island that has reached 500 years of age. I thought of giving this flower to you as an apology to your father on behalf of Jingqing. I hope that you will be magnanimous and forgive him this time, ginseng flower? After hearing this, even Qin Shi could not help but be stunned. A ginseng flower that had just reached 500 years of age. Ginseng flowers were very common in Heavenly Spiral, but the rare ones were those that were exactly 500 years old. A little is not enough, but a lot is more than enough. It was not too much, not too little. Who would have thought that Diyu Island would have such a rare treasure? Perhaps it was because he had not seen anything good in a long time, but Qin Shi could not help but feel a little moved. However, after thinking about it, he still replied coldly, "Don't blame me for not showing mercy. If you want to blame someone, you can only blame yourself for being blind and hurting someone who should not have been hurt." After saying that, Qin Shi continued to walk towards Jiang Jingqing with his sword in hand. In reality, even if Qin Shi had been injured, there was still room for negotiation for the sake of this ginseng flower. However, Jiang Jingqing had injured Qin Yongyan. How could they continue the negotiation? There was no room for negotiation at all. Because Jiang Jingqing's injuries were too severe, he was already in a semi-conscious state. He had no idea that death was slowly approaching him. Jiang Yuankui stood on the steps and was so anxious that he wanted to call the police, but he did not dare to stop him. He was really afraid that if Qin Shi was unhappy, he would cut him down as well. At such a critical juncture, it was obvious that only the old man whom he had never met before could stop Qin Shi. Just as expected. Just as Qin Shi was about to swing his sword, the old man's voice rang out unhurriedly. Sir, you're actually here for your wife, right? The matter of Si Ming Xian Nu involves the secrets of our clan. It should not be mentioned to outsiders. If you're willing to let Jingqing live, I promise to tell you everything I know. Chapter 357. What do you think? Although Daiyu Island was the Jiang clan's territory, the old man was very humble, as if he was really afraid of Qin Shi. Seeing that the old man's attitude was so proper, Qin Shi stopped and began to think after listening to his words. At that moment, Qin Ruoying suddenly called out to him. Shi. It was just a simple word, but Qin Shi immediately understood what she meant. Ying was advising him to be lenient. After all, their family was not the dragon of Kunshan, nor were they wolves, tigers, or leopards. Naturally, they would not let the Jiang clan go bankrupt because of this. It was about time. Of course, he had to listen to his wife. However, Qin Shi already had a plan in mind, so he pretended to be hesitant. Qin Shi did not say anything, so naturally no one dared to say anything either. The dilapidated square was deathly silent. Jiang Yuankui looked at Qin Shi nervously, feeling as if his heart was about to jump out of his throat. How could there be such a terrifying person in this world? Not only Su Feng but even second granduncle could not take a single blow from him. Could it be that this person came from the sky? Thinking of this, Jiang Yuankui could not help but look up at the cloud vortex in the sky. The golden light was still dazzling. However, he felt a chill in his heart for no reason. Could it be the prophecy left by the ancestor really came true one day? As people often say, sometimes it is not good to know too much. Being muddle-headed is the true meaning of life. Jiang Yuankui was clearly such an example. He looked at Qin Shi's back, but his mind was filled with distracting thoughts. After an unknown period of time, Qin Shi's voice brought Jiang Yuankui back to reality. All right, then I will let him live. I hope you don't disappoint me. After saying this, Qin Shi suddenly waved his sleeve, and an invisible force swept up Jiang Jingqing, then threw him directly to Jiang Yuankui. After Jiang Yuankui hurriedly caught Jiang Jingqing, the old man's voice sounded again. That's great. Please move to Heron Island, Mr. Qin. Yuankui, lead the way for Mr. The so-called Egret Island was actually the smallest of the 17 islands. At the same time, it was also the Jiang clan's forbidden area. Ordinary people were not allowed to enter. Under Jiang Yuankui's guidance, Qin Shi's family of 3 took a small boat to Heron Island. Apart from Jiang Yuankui, there was also the cold-faced woman from before. After Jiang Yuankui's introduction, Qin Shi found out that this woman was actually the Jiang clan's Si Ming Xian Nu, Jiang Yuanqing. Since Jiang Yuanqing was of the same generation as Jiang Yuankui, his age would naturally not be that young. Xian Nu of the 10,000 Holy Valley would automatically step down from her position at the age of 30. Jiang Yuanqing, a middle-aged Xian Nu woman, was able to sit firmly in the position of Xian Nu's high priestess. Just this point alone was enough to show that the Jiang clan was indeed in possession of some secrets that were unknown to others. The boat quickly approached Heron Island. As soon as they got off the boat, the little fellow's attention was immediately attracted by a few red-crowned cranes. Papa, what's this? I think I've seen them before. As she spoke, the little fellow ran over eagerly. However, because these red-crowned cranes were too tall, she did not dare to get close. She could only stand timidly at the side looking extremely cute. These are red-crowned cranes. You can also call them red-crowned cranes. There are only about 1,000 of them in the world. They're even rarer than pandas. Red-crowned cranes? I know. I've read about them in books. Perhaps it was because of the abundance of spirit energy on Daiyu Island. These red-crowned cranes were obviously somewhat human. Seeing the little fellow approaching, not only did they not leave, but they even took the initiative to stretch their necks over. Seeing this, the little fellow could not help but reach out to touch their feathers. She was overjoyed. This child was almost bored to death on the yacht. Now that she finally found a few red-crowned cranes to play with, Qin Shi naturally had to let her have fun. Thus, Qin Shi asked for the little fellow's opinion. After confirming that the little fellow wanted to play here for a while, he handed the long sword in his hand to Qin Ruoying. He then continued to follow Jiang Yuankui to the depths of Heron Island. As a forbidden area of the clan, Heron Island was like a paradise on earth. The paths in the forest crisscrossed and it was truly charming. Birds chirped and colorful butterflies danced. Under the illumination of the Great Formation's golden light, the island was even more like a celestial scene with rosy clouds and lingering smoke. The center of Heron Island was not a mountain peak, but a clear lake. There was a wooden building in the center of the lake. It looked like a pavilion, but it was not a pavilion. Therefore, it looked a little like the pavilion in the middle of the lake where Ning Kaichen and Ye Xiaoqian met in the movie, A Chinese Ghost Story. After arriving at the bridge, Jiang Yuankui bowed to Qin Shi. He then pointed at the building in the center of the lake and said very respectfully, "The Jiang family's illustrious ancestor has been waiting for you here for a long time. It's not appropriate for me to go near, so please go ahead on your own." Qin Shi did not stand on ceremony when he heard that. He slowly walked toward the pavilion in the middle of the lake. The pavilion in the middle of the lake only had a curtain for blocking. Qin Shi waited outside the pavilion for a while. Seeing that there seemed to be no movement in the pavilion, he directly opened the curtain and walked in. As soon as he entered the room, the first thing that came into view was a table. Qin Shi raised his head to take a look. His attention was attracted by an item placed on the table. There was a soul crystal on the table. Furthermore, this soul crystal was even larger than Qin Shi's soul crystal. A little interesting. Qin Shi smiled and shook his head. Then he sat down on the armchair. After taking a seat, he looked at the soul crystals on the table and slowly said, "I really didn't think that someone would be able to form a nascent soul under such harsh conditions. That's quite impressive, sir, you flatter me." As soon as he finished speaking, the old man's voice suddenly rang out in the room. And the source of the voice? It was none other than the soul crystal on the counter. Qin Shi did not find this strange at all. Instead, he looked at the portrait on the table with interest. Then he smiled and asked, "Is that you?" "That's me. You were quite handsome when you were young." The conversation came to an abrupt end. The room suddenly quieted down. It was so quiet that the sound of the wind outside could be heard. It seemed that no one wanted to speak again. In fact, since the first time Qin Shi saw this soul crystal, he understood why the old man always gave in to him. Diviners were only pseudo-cores. Only those who were above diviners could be called golden cores. So far, among all the people Qin Shi had met, except for Bai Hong's group who came down from the heavenly gate, this old man who hid Yuanying in the soul crystal in front of him had the highest cultivation. When the forest was big, there would naturally be all kinds of birds. So, the only thing that surprised Qin Shi was that, this old man did not even have a body, but he still had to rely on the soul crystal to survive. How many years had he lived? 500 years? Or 1,000 years? In any case, he had lived longer than Qin Shi. Chapter 358. Looking at the soul crystal in front of him, Qin Shi could not help but put himself in the old man's shoes. If it had been him, he should not be living in this way. It was obvious that the old man could no longer be reborn, so he could only put his Yuanying in the soul crystal, and then rely on the soul crystal to barely maintain the state of his divine soul. Just like the remnant soul of the azure dragon in the sundial brilliance temple. But what was the point of this? Without a body, the soul crystal was just a cage in disguise. If one could live for 10 or 20 more years, they might feel that they had profited, but if they really stayed in it for hundreds or even thousands of years. It was a little scary just thinking about it. One had to know that although the divine soul could perceive the outside world in the soul crystal, the feeling was completely different from that of ordinary people. It was probably somewhat similar to a sixth sense. For the old man, it was like being in a world of chaos that had not yet been opened. He could not directly see the outside world, but he could clearly perceive any subtle movements in the outside world. Struggling at death's door in the gap between two worlds, the loneliness brought about by drifting away from reality was actually a kind of torture and punishment that ordinary people could not bear at all. Therefore, Qin Shi could not help but sigh from the bottom of his heart. This old man was also a ruthless person. Qin Shi silently looked at the portrait on the wall. After a long while, he took the lead to break the silence. "Well, I don't have as much time as you, so don't waste time here. Looking at your age, you should know a lot of things. Let's talk. I'm very interested in the matters of ancient cultivators. Why don't we start talking about it?" Qin Shi opened the conversation. But the old man did not immediately answer after hearing it, but instead laughed. Although his expression could not be seen, the laughter gave Qin Shi a strange feeling. That feeling. It was somewhat like the young man and wise old man who often appeared in jokes. The young man asked the old man to answer his questions, but the old man smiled and did not say anything, but instead put on a posture of having seen through the world of mortals and understood the true meaning of life. In this regard, Qin Shi's reaction was completely different from that of the young man in the joke. "Keeping me in suspense, right? Alright, take your time. I'm going to kill that guy. As soon as he finished speaking, Qin Shi stood up and pretended to leave. His unconventional behavior immediately threw the old man into disarray. He had no choice but to shout anxiously, "Sir, please wait." It's not that this old man is deliberately keeping you in suspense, but it's a long story. Mister, please take a seat and listen to this old man from the beginning. Hearing this, Qin Shi couldn't help but snort coldly. He used his hand to tidy up his clothes and then slowly sat back down. Could it be that Jiang Jingqing dared to challenge the patriarch in public? Most likely this old man was backing him up. It seemed like the Jiang clan really had no successors. Otherwise, how could a mere above-heaven tier receive such importance? Qin Shi sat in the chair with a cold face. The old man originally wanted to take the opportunity to inquire about Qin Shi's background, but he didn't expect Qin Shi's style to be so simple and crude, threatening Jiang Jingqing's life at every turn. The hope of the Jiang clan's revival was all placed on Jiang Jingqing. Since Qin Shi had already displayed such an attitude, the old man naturally didn't dare to change the topic. He could only open his mouth and tell the story. Actually, this matter starts from ancient times. The so-called ancient times actually referred to the time before the Xia dynasty, which was the time before the birth of human civilization. Western scholars did not recognize the existence of the Xia dynasty. On one hand, it was because Westerners had a different understanding of Wuxia culture. On the other hand, it was because archaeologists had not found any written records of the Xia dynasty. If it weren't for the discovery of the Yin ruins in Yuzhou, Western scholars would even doubt the authenticity of the Shang dynasty. Both the Xia dynasty and the ancient Indian civilization appeared more than 4,000 years ago, while the ancient Egyptian civilization and the Sumerian civilization appeared more than 7,000 years ago. However, it had only been 2,000 years since the day Jesus was born, but human civilization had already stepped into the information age from the Iron Age, the Steam Age, and the Electric Age. It wouldn't be long before human beings could truly enter the space age and soar freely in the universe. How many years had it been? And what about Earth? Earth was already 4.6 billion years old. 46000000000. A series of zeros, wasn't that enough to explain the problem? Therefore, there was no doubt that as early as the ancient times, there were humans on Earth, but they were forced to leave. This was the fundamental reason why humans could still find records of mythical civilizations from ancient books to this day. Earth was a cultivation planet, not a dead planet like Mars. It was the source of life and the beginning of everything. In front of it, immortal cultivators were too insignificant. Tides rose and fell. When the spirit energy of Earth declined, it was like the water of the Pacific Ocean drying up for immortal cultivators. Doomsday came. Fortunately, there was always a way out. Coincidentally, the Taiching divine ancestor appeared out of nowhere and saved everyone from the fire and water with his own strength. Although Qin Shi already knew this information from Bai Hong, he didn't interrupt the old man. Instead, he silently listened to the old man again. However, as he listened, Qin Shi suddenly realized there was a big difference between the old man and Bai Hong's narration. At first, Qin Shi suspected that either of them was lying, but on second thought, he immediately dismissed this speculation. After all, it had been 10,000 years since the ancient times. 3 people's words could become a tiger, let alone these legends passed down by word of mouth. Therefore, Qin Shi didn't think that either of them was lying to him. One lived on Earth and the other lived in the great world. The two of them were in different positions, so what they saw and heard was naturally different. Bai Hong focused on the great world, but when it came to the old man, he naturally focused on Earth after the ancient immortal cultivators left. So, the Taiching divine ancestor didn't leave with everyone back then, but left some people behind. They either had old grudges with the Taiching divine ancestor or committed some unforgivable sin. In short, they were abandoned by the Taiching divine ancestor, so they were forced to stay on Earth. However, the Taiching divine ancestor was deeply righteous. How could he not understand that the sins of the elders had nothing to do with the juniors? Therefore, the divine ancestor made a promise. As long as the descendants of the sinners could cultivate to the diviner level, they could return to Chengdu through the divine gate. This was the origin of the concept of ascension. In fact, in the beginning, the cultivation environment on Earth wasn't as bad as it was today. Therefore, there were dozens of diviner-level cultivators back then, which led to the legend of the investiture of the gods. Wasn't it a good thing for everyone to form a group and ascend? Unfortunately, no one would have thought that the cultivation environment on Earth would deteriorate so quickly. Starting from the Warring States period, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth began to decrease rapidly, so much so that the divine gate rarely appeared in 100 years. The living environment of immortal cultivators became worse and worse. In the end, they had to hide among the famous mountains and rivers, relying on the weak spiritual energy in the blessed lands to barely maintain their legacies. Thus, the 5 great legacies were born. The immortal cultivators were declining day by day, and there was also the matter of the first emperor burning books and burying scholars. Everything about the ancient immortal cultivators could only regretfully come to an end. Not bad, a very good story. After listening to the old man's detailed narration, Qin couldn't help but praise it again and again. It really gave birth to a feeling of looking through history, magnificent and magnificent. It could be said to be soul-stirring. However, although the story was good, Qin didn't forget the purpose of this trip. Chapter 359. Just as the old man had promised, as long as Qin was willing to spare Jiang Jingqing's life, he would tell Qin everything he knew. Reality proved that the old man had no intention of deceiving Qin. Perhaps it was out of fear, or perhaps it was because he wanted to form a good relationship with Qin, but the old man told him everything he knew without hesitation. However, what Qin did not expect was, when he mentioned the name, Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu, the old man suddenly fell silent. Qin waited for a while. When he showed an obvious hint of impatience, the old man's voice slowly sounded from the soul crystal. Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu? It has been more than 3,000 years since the Jiang clan stepped foot on Daiyu Island. You are not the first person to ask this question in these 3,000 years, and I believe you will not be the last. The reason why the Jiang clan's Xian Nu has a longer lifespan than the Xian Nu of the outside world is because there is no real Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu in the Jiang clan. Qin could not help but frown slightly when he heard that. There was no Xian Nu? Then what about the woman who stood beside Jiang Yuankue and gave orders? Although Qin did not say anything, the old man seemed to have sensed his thoughts and immediately added, Yuan Qing is indeed the current Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu of the Jiang clan. She is responsible for presiding over the clan's sacrificial ceremonies, praying for blessings and other matters. However, compared to your wife, her Xian Nu is just a fake. As soon as he said this, Qin instantly understood what the old man meant. He had long known that the condition to become a Xian Nu was to give up the earthly soul. He had originally thought that the Jiang clan had some secret method to extend the Xian Nu's lifespan, but in the end, he realized that the so-called secret method was to prevent the Xian Nu from giving up the earthly soul. Wasn't the old man talking nonsense with him and wasting his time? The old man's answer made Qin quite dissatisfied, but this was obviously not the time to flare up, so he could only frown and ask, I don't have time to talk nonsense with you. You have to answer me honestly. Xian Nu is a fait accompli. Is there any way to cure her? At this point, Qin couldn't help but promise the old man, you should know how important this matter is to me. If you help me today, I promise, even if I have to go through water and tread on fire in the future, I will definitely return this favor to you. I won't go back on my word. Qin, who never made promises easily, took the initiative to make a promise to the old man at this moment. It was easy to imagine how anxious he was. Although Qin Ruoying only had a slight headache, Qin felt as if he was facing a formidable enemy. In fact, in the end he was just afraid. Afraid of losing. After all, he had already separated from Yingying once. The husband and wife had gone through different kinds of suffering and torment to finally get to where they were today. The family of 3 had finally reunited and lived a happy life together. If Qin Ruoying was safe and sound, then it would be fine. But if something happened to her, Qin would never forgive himself. Absolutely not. Of course, these emotions were buried in the deepest part of his heart. Naturally, Qin couldn't easily reveal them. Therefore, after making his promise, he silently waited for the old man's answer. The room was very quiet. It was so quiet that he could even hear the wind outside. The white curtain was gently blown by the wind, just like his heart that couldn't calm down. After an unknown amount of time, the old man's voice rang out again. However, the old man didn't rush to answer Qin's question. Instead, he changed the topic and asked coldly, I can answer your question. But before that, please answer this old man's 3 questions, okay? Although he didn't know what the old man was up to, now was not the time to be anxious, so Qin could only answer patiently, please go ahead. The first question. Sir, do you know what realm the divine ancestor was at back then? Hearing the old man's question, Qin couldn't help but be stunned. Although he wasn't interested in these unimportant things since the old man mentioned it, there must be a reason, so he seriously thought about it. Qi refinement, foundation establishment, golden core, yuanying, soul formation, insightful void, Tao integration, tribulation ascension, Mahayana. Since the divine ancestor was able to find a great world in the void, his cultivation must be at least above the insightful void realm, or even the legendary Tao integration realm. Such a powerful person was definitely a big shot in the heavenly jade world, comparable to the sect master of the divine sect. Thinking of this, even she couldn't help but yearn for it. Earth used to be, perhaps it was more prosperous than he had imagined. While she was pondering, the old man didn't give him time to think at all, and directly continued to ask the second question. 10,000 years ago, how many cultivators were there in the divine continent? This question really tested Qin. He wasn't an archaeologist, how would he know how many people there were at that time? But then the old man threw out a third question. The third question: Sir, how do you think the divine ancestor could bring all these people to the great world with his strength alone? At this point, if Qin still didn't understand what the old man meant, it could only mean that he was too stupid. Therefore, the moment the old man finished asking the third question, Qin suddenly stood up from his chair as if he had been electrocuted, and then couldn't help but exclaim, "The arbiter of fate Xian Nu?" Yes. Sir, you should also know that the arbiter of fate is the mandate of heaven. But how can we cultivators believe in the groundless heaven? The so-called heaven's will, it's the divine ancestor's order to bear the fate of all living beings? Bear the fate of all living beings? When he heard this, Qin's expression changed drastically. He could already guess what the old man wanted to say. Although the Taiching divine ancestor was omnipotent, he couldn't bring millions of ancient cultivators to the great world with his strength alone. Therefore there had to be some secret behind this. And the key to this secret was clearly the arbiter of fate Xian Nu. As expected, the old man quickly confirmed Qin's guess. The arbiter of fate Xian Nu, that's a nice title, but to put it bluntly, they're the living sacrifices chosen by the divine ancestor. Everyone says that the divine ancestor has the merit of saving the world, and with his omnipotent power, he turned the tide and saved the world. But they've forgotten the road to the great world. Chapter 360. A living sacrifice. The moment he heard these three words, Qin understood everything. Even if the grand pure divine ancestor's cultivation was extremely high, it was impossible for him to forcefully open and stabilize the passage between the two worlds by himself. After all, there were too many people who needed him to save. Not 1,000, not 10,000, but millions and tens of millions. The grand pure divine ancestor did indeed save the world. But at the same time, this contribution was also stained with the blood of too many innocent people. Not everyone could travel through the void and cross realms as they wished. Therefore, the grand pure divine ancestor could only rely on external forces to allow everyone to go to the great world unharmed. If the Sundial Brilliance Temple was the coordinate between the two worlds, then the soul of Xian Nu was the track to the great world. When the end of the world was approaching, the train led by the grand pure divine ancestor carried the hopes of the ancient cultivators and rumbled toward the great world full of the unknown. The only place that was not harmonious was probably the railroad track. There were millions of people who needed to be saved. The number of Xian Nu who needed to be sacrificed was also not a small number. One after another, weak and fragile souls. In terms of individual strength, they were not even worth mentioning. They were too weak. A single strand of silk could not make a thread, and a single tree could not make a forest. Under the guidance of the grand pure divine ancestor, these weak souls of Xian Nu were connected to each other one by one. Like sections of track, they paved all the way from Earth to the great world, forcibly opening up a path of survival for the cultivators in the Age of Doom. How was this a path of survival? It was a nether river full of wronged souls. Because, only through the guidance of Xian Nu's soul could the grand pure divine ancestor use this to stabilize the passage between the two worlds, so that those who were not at the soul formation stage could safely pass through the void cracks. Although he had not witnessed this history with his own eyes, Qin had a rough understanding of that ancient era. He was even willing to believe this was not a dark past but a grand epic. In order to continue the legacy of the ancient cultivators, even the weak Xian Nu was willing to sacrifice her life to protect the legacy of the ancient cultivators. Traveling in the wind and rain, passing on the torch. Despite all the hardships, the jade was finally formed. In truth, the sacred ancestor wasn't wrong. With the divine ancestor's cultivation, there was no need for him to care about the lives and deaths of all living beings. Wouldn't it be great for him to live a carefree life in the great world by himself? But he didn't. Instead, he chose to return to Earth and seek a chance of survival for all living beings with his own strength. Was a pity. History had already proven that the founder of every dynasty was great, but after that, each generation would be worse than the last. The world only remembered the peerless leader, but forgot about the Siming Xiannu who had sacrificed everything to save them. This was also the reason why Bai Hong knew nothing about Siming Xiannu. No matter what the reason was, the survivors of the great world had long forgotten the greatness of Siming Xiannu. Back then, the divine ancestor gathered the most precious treasures in the world and refined a total of 13 soul-amassing cauldrons. There is one in each of the 5 places of inheritance, and the other 8 are scattered in the divine land. Now no one knows where they are. These 13 soul-amassing cauldrons and the heaven-bearing effecate floating dawn mirror formed the set of supreme treasures that could save all living beings. Of course, the soul-amassing cauldron was mainly used to collect Xiannu's earthly soul. The heaven-bearing effecate floating dawn mirror was the true core. After Xiannu offered her earthly soul to the soul-amassing cauldron, the divine ancestor held the mirror in his hand and led everyone to the blissful great world in the void. The old man recounted the events of the past. After hearing this, Qin Shi frowned and seemed to be thinking about something. Seeing that he didn't intend to speak, the old man paused for a moment before continuing. I'm sure you know that with your wife's current cultivation, she definitely wouldn't have fallen sick if her soul was fine. So I'm guessing this might have something to do with the heaven-bearing effecate floating dawn mirror. After all, this treasure was left behind by the divine ancestor. No one knows what secrets are hidden in it. If you want to completely solve this problem, I'm afraid you have to find the heaven-bearing effecate floating dawn mirror first. After the old man finished speaking, the room fell silent again. After a long time, Qin Shi seemed to be talking to himself and couldn't help but mutter, "Sky-bearing imitation Fuli mirror, right?" Seeing that his reaction was a little strange, the old man comforted him. For thousands of years I've seen many similar situations. Many Xiannu wanted to cultivate when they grew up, but because they lacked one of their 3 earthly souls, they could only die with regret. But once they found their earthly soul, they could walk, sit, and lie down. Their spiritual sense was no different from that of ordinary people. Your wife only had a little dizziness and dark vision. It shouldn't be a big deal, so you don't have to worry too much. Not a big deal? Qin Shi wasn't as optimistic about this as the old man. But now wasn't the time to be worrying unnecessarily, so he could only put this problem aside for the time being. He then stood up and said, "All right, since I've said what I needed to say, let's leave it at that for today. I'll remember this favor. In the future, if the Jiang family has anything to ask of me, I won't hesitate to help." Then I'll thank Mr. Qin first. The conversation finally came to an end. Jiang Yuankue had been waiting at the bridge for a long time. When he saw Qin Shi walk out of the room, he immediately went to the pavilion in the middle of the lake. After sneaking a peek at the situation in the room, he finally felt relieved. It seemed like he was really afraid that Qin Shi would hurt the elder ancestor. "All right, you don't have to follow me. Go inside and wait." When Qin Shi saw that Jiang Yuankue wanted to send him off, he waved his hand and rejected him. Then he walked back the way he came from. When he returned to the shore, the little fellow was still playing with the red-crowned cranes in the pond. These red-crowned cranes were like dolphins. They would rub against her from time to time, which really made the little fellow very happy. If it weren't for Qin Ruoying's repeated dissuasion, the little fellow even wanted to bring a few of them back. The little fellow was very happy, but Qin Shi's mood didn't seem to be very good. The little fellow had long been trained to observe people's expressions. When she saw that Qin Shi was unhappy, she didn't dawdle anymore. After waving goodbye to the red-crowned cranes, she lay in Qin Shi's arms and obediently got on the boat. Under the gaze of the Jiang family, the yacht slowly sailed away from the dock. At this time, Qin Ruoying gently held Qin Shi's hand and asked softly, "Shi, what's wrong?" "Nothing." Qin Shi pinched the little fellow's butt and signaled her to sit still. After that, he held Qin Ruoying's hand and went to the bow of the boat. It was late at night. A bright moon hung high above the sea, constantly emitting a cold light. Looking at his lover beside him, Qin Shi couldn't help but ask faintly, "Ying, what kind of person do you think I am?" "Why would you ask that?" "I'm actually a very selfish person." "I don't think so." Qin Ruoying felt that something was wrong with Qin Shi. She imitated the little fellow and put her head on his other shoulder, hoping to make him feel at ease. However, Qin Shi looked as if he was sick. He stared blankly at the bright moon and replied in a daze, Really, I'm very selfish. For you, I can give up the whole world. All living beings are just ants in my eyes. If one day you're no longer here, I think I might be able to destroy this world and make all the unpleasant things disappear. Shi was still expressing his feelings when Qin Ruoying suddenly pinched him and said with an unhappy face, "What nonsense are you talking about?" The little fellow didn't understand what they were talking about, but she could clearly feel that her mother was angry, so she imitated Qin Ruoying, raised her head and said in a coquettish voice, "What nonsense are you talking about?" Well, the eldest and the second in the family were furious. Shi had to immediately raise his hands to surrender and apologize. Okay, I'm talking nonsense. Ying, don't be angry. And you, why are you making a fuss? I'm not making a fuss. Hearing this, the little fellow immediately pouted and retorted with dissatisfaction. It's Papa's disobedience that made Mama angry. I'm so obedient, Mama won't be angry with me. Okay, you're the most obedient. Come, let Daddy kiss you. No, I'm angry. After saying that, the little fellow immediately turned her head to the side and refused to let Shi kiss her no matter what. One wanted to kiss, the other wanted to block. Looking at the noisy father and daughter, Qin Ruoying couldn't help but smile, and then she leaned her head on Shi's shoulder again. In fact, she knew what Shi was worried about. But for her, instead of deliberately preparing for a rainy day, it was better to live in the moment calmly. People often have thousands of thoughts about the future, but they forget to calm down and appreciate the present moment. The future days. Chapter 361. The next morning. Under the caress of the morning sun, the yacht slowly sailed into the Zhonghai harbor. Although they were in Zhonghai, the couple had no intention of disturbing Lin Xian. The family of three was like a group of tourists passing by in a hurry. They didn't even stay for long. After accompanying the little one for a meal of KFC at the airport, they got on the plane back home. The only gain from this trip to Zhonghai was, perhaps it was success that put Qin in a bad mood. They really came in high spirits but returned in disappointment. Obviously, the sky-bearing art and floating dawn mirror had already gone to the great world with the Taiching sage. If he wanted to completely cure Qin Ruoying's dizziness, then he had to go to the great world himself. In this regard, Qin only had 3 words in his mind, F***CKU. He had just returned from the heavenly spiral world after a narrow escape, but now he had to go to a great world like heavenly spiral. Wasn't he just too bored? Regarding this unknown world, Qin had long made up her mind to keep a respectful distance from it. But fortunately, ever since he destroyed the 5 holy palaces, no matter how turbulent the spirit energy tide was, the divine gate didn't appear again. This also indirectly proved that the great world had lost contact with Earth. In fact, whether it was immortal cultivation techniques or modern technology, if one wanted to teleport from one place to another, the coordinates were essential. Without the coordinates, the divine gate would never open again. Unless the Taiching sage came back and crossed the void to establish new coordinates for the ancient immortal cultivators. And this was also why Qin said he was selfish. Because he had also cut off the possibility of celestial ascension. From now on, the 2 worlds would no longer have any communication. The people above couldn't come down and the people below couldn't go up. You were in your great world and I was in my global village. Everyone minded their own business, wasn't that good? Since it was impossible to get the sky-bearing art and floating dawn mirror, Qin Ruoying's illness could only be temporarily put aside for observation. On the way back, Qin felt that something was wrong the more he thought about it. Previously, he had placed all his attention on Si Ming Xiannu and neglected the old man's strange behavior. Was it really so easy to deal with an old monster that had lived for over 1,000 years? Besides, since the Jiang clan did not have the Si Ming Xiannu, how did Daiyu Island become one of the 5 great lands of inheritance? The old man's story should be true, but Qin had a feeling that the old man was deliberately hiding some important information. However, since he did not plan to go to the great world, he did not need to delve too deeply into these things. Anyway, Daiyu Island was right there. Once Qin realized that the old monster had lied to him, he could not guarantee that he would do something terrible. After the family of 3 returned to Shangjing, their days were peaceful again. The summer sun shone brightly and the willows by the lakeside rustled gently. Sightseeing, playing in the water and flying kites, Hohai had different sceneries throughout the year. Time passed quietly amidst the laughter of the 3 little fellows. In the blink of an eye, the summer vacation was over, and the country welcomed the start of school again. And this little guy had finally ushered in the most important phase of his life. Cool. To be honest, Nianyan's personality had begun to change under the intentional indulgence of her husband and wife. Although she was still the obedient, sensible, and polite little fellow, she would throw a tantrum from time to time now. She had some traces of a spoiled brat. Of course, Qin Shi and Qin Ruoying could not be blamed for this. After all, they owed their child too much. Nianyan had been an orphan since she was young. Now that she finally had her parents, shouldn't she throw a tantrum and experience the feeling of being doted on by her parents? Childhood, happiness was the most important thing. However, a child could throw a tantrum at home, but no one would indulge her outside. Therefore, a few days before school started, Qin Shi seriously tutored the little fellow and warned her about many things. For example, she had to study hard in school, listen to the teachers, abide by the school rules, and not bully her classmates. Of course, she could not be bullied by her classmates. When Qin Shi mentioned the last point before the little fellow had time to nod, the two brothers couldn't wait and shouted loudly, "With us here, no one dares to bully her." The younger brother, who had always been straightforward and honest, did not forget to add at this moment, "If anyone bullies you, just tell me. I'll help you beat him up." "And me. Let's beat him up together." "Okay." Yes, the two brothers also wanted to go to school with Nianyan. Although it was only a senior class, this was the first step in the little fellow's student life. Therefore, even though Qin Shi had always said that he wanted to let Nianyan live an ordinary life, when it came time to choose, he still listened to his sister-in-law's advice and chose the Donghua Gate Kindergarten, which was located next to the Forbidden City and was known as the best in the country. It was not an exaggeration. If one stood outside and casually threw a brick into the kindergarten, it might hit the grandson of some big boss. One could imagine how deep the background of this kindergarten was. It was said that the children of the rich won at the starting line. From this moment on, the competition had already begun. Donghua Gate Kindergarten was less than 5 kilometers away from Hohai. On the first day of school, there was no way to take the school bus, so Qin Shi had to personally send the three of them to school. Along the way, the three little fellows were extremely happy. They carried the same style of cartoon school bag. Nianyan walked in the middle, and the two brothers stood on her left and right, like guardians, protecting her at all times. A bus slowly drove over from afar. Qin Shi did not have any reaction, but the two brothers excitedly squeezed Nianyan onto the sidewalk, and then very seriously warned, "Nianyan, when you walk, you have to look at the bus. Look at how big that bus is. If it hits you, you'll be dead. Do you understand?" The little fellow nodded blankly. Then she looked back at Qin Shi. After seeing Qin Shi smile and nod at her, she turned her head and began to look at the bus next to her. Everything was too novel. Although she had been to kindergarten before, this seemed to be the first time she went to school. Papa also said that in the future, they would have to take the school bus to and from school. School bus? What was that? Thinking about it, the little fellow could not help but raise her head and look around. On the old streets of Shangjing, the bright sunlight shone on her through the shade of the trees. The surrounding cars and pedestrians seemed to be a little different from usual. Was this going to school? Qin Shi walked with the three children for a while. After confirming the dedicated parking space for the school bus, he took a taxi directly to Donghua Gate Kindergarten. It was only 5 kilometers, so they arrived very quickly. As soon as they got out of the car, Qin Shi realized that this kindergarten was indeed a little famous. The cars parked in front of the school were not particularly expensive luxury cars, but the license plates all started with Beijing A. It should be known that most of the cars starting with Beijing A8 were leaders of the government, while Beijing AG6 was national level. However, none of the cars with Beijing A license plates were easy to deal with. Even the traffic police had to go around them. At this time, Qin Shi suddenly remembered, this was Shangjing. Next door was the Forbidden City and next door was Zongnanhai. Would the security guard let someone like him in by taxi? Of course, this was only Qin Shi's imagination. After he showed the procedures that his sister-in-law had done for him in advance, the security guard at the door respectfully welcomed him in. How sensitive were Qin Shi's ears. Therefore, as soon as he entered the school, he found that these parents basically knew each other. Everyone even greeted each other. Since the parents knew each other, the children were naturally childhood sweethearts as well. Seeing this, Qin Shi frowned slightly. These children. Chapter 362. The children of the courtyard could also be considered a characteristic of Wuxia. In the past, the units had to allocate houses and everyone in the unit lived together. Everyone saw each other all day long and their children would naturally play together since they were young. They were the so-called childhood sweethearts. Of course, it would be fine if it was an ordinary unit. The children of the courtyard that people talked about were mostly the children of high-ranking cadres. Their parents either held important positions in various ministries or were cadres above the regimental level. These children grew up together since they were young. There was a clear distinction between who could play with whom and who could oppose whom. In addition, because they had seen a lot since they were young, the children of the courtyard were usually more mature. In this regard, Qin had to hesitate. If he put Yin among these children for her growth, was it good or bad? However, after thinking about it, Qin still felt relieved. After all, these children had received different education since they were young and there were more restrictions in various aspects. If he really wanted to compare, it might be easier to get along with them than children from ordinary families. In short, he would give it a try first. If Yin was unhappy, he would find another place for her. While thinking, Qin led the 3 children into the school. Today was the registration day. The main purpose was to help the children adapt to the environment of the kindergarten. It was not official enrollment yet. Therefore, after Qin filled in the form, he led the 3 children to the classroom under the guidance of the teacher. Since the school was so famous, there must be some skills in the background. Qin glanced casually and found that there seemed to be more teachers in the school than there were parents. There were main class teachers, assistant class teachers, auxiliary class teachers, life teachers, care and health teachers. There was everything. Along the way, regardless of whether they knew each other, the teachers were very kind and greeted the 3 children. Those who did not know would think that they were eating heideleo. Under the guidance of the teacher, they quickly arrived at the big classroom. The 3 children did not go to the middle class but came directly to the big class. Such unfamiliar faces naturally attracted the attention of the other parents. Other families usually had one person dragging one person, but Qin was dragging 3 people. In addition, he was a new face, so everyone couldn't help but whisper to each other. "Oldly, have you seen this person before? It looks like a new face. He didn't even come to the parent-teacher meeting yesterday. Didn't you see the enrollment list before? Which unit is he from?" Now that you mention it, I remember that there were originally only 60 spots for this semester. However, a few days before the start of the semester, 3 spots were forcefully inserted. They didn't even attend the interview and just waited to report. "You didn't even attend the interview? So powerful. Isn't that so? When I brought the child here, I didn't even pass the interview. If it weren't for my uncle, I reckon it would have been over. We begged and it wasn't easy for us to get a spot. Yet he casually dragged in 3 people. This is, sure you know." After a brief discussion, the 2 parents glanced at each other in tacit understanding. They immediately came up with a plan. There were many small tables in the classroom. 3 to 5 parents gathered around a table with their children. However, similar discussions were constantly taking place at each table. Why do parents nowadays like to let their children go to good schools? Grades were only one of the reasons. The most important thing was, a good school could build better connections for the children, and the importance of these connections could not be compared with a few simple numbers on the report card. Classmate relationships. Only 10 or 20 years later, when everyone had stepped into society, would they deeply realize how valuable this word was. Although everyone was whispering, Qin pretended not to hear them. As soon as he entered the classroom, he took the 3 children and sat down according to their nameplates. The children in the kindergarten were still young. Naturally, it was impossible for the children to go on stage and introduce themselves as soon as they entered the classroom. Therefore, they could only wait for the children to adapt before the teachers arranged for them to begin the self-introduction. There were many delicate little toys on the table. As soon as they sat down, the 3 children were attracted by these toys. The teachers were indeed very attentive. They even prepared an exclusive gift bag for each child. The little girl was still very familiar with her name. Therefore, she immediately grabbed the gift box with the words, "Chen Yin," written on it and couldn't wait to open it. Inside was a children's picture book that could be used in both Chinese and English. At the same time, there were many exquisite puzzle toys. Therefore, the 3 children immediately gathered together to play like they did in the tea house. There were already 2 children sitting at this table. Seeing that they were so lively, the 2 children went over to play with them. Perhaps because she had stayed in the tea house for a long time, Yin usually played with unfamiliar children. Therefore, she did not hesitate. With a wave of her small hand, she very generously invited the 2 children. It was fun with more people. Since the children were playing together, the adults naturally took the opportunity to strike up a conversation. Bro, are you a Dragon Phoenix triplet? The one who spoke was a bespectacled man about the same age as Qin Shi. Chapter 363. After the bespectacled man explained everything to Qin Shi, he couldn't help but put on a haughty look. He was confident, but he didn't know that this confidence was meaningless in front of Qin Shi. Therefore, after Qin Shi chuckled a few times, he acted as if he didn't understand the bespectacled man's words and turned to talk to Wang Junqing about the child. In this spacious and warm classroom he wasn't a god, nor was he Mr. Chen. He was just a child's father. Seeing that Qin Shi didn't play by the rules, Wang Junqing couldn't figure him out for a while. However, he didn't neglect Qin Shi because of this. Since he didn't want to talk, then he couldn't blame him for investigating on his own. Therefore, after giving the bespectacled man a look, Wang Junqing followed the topic and started chatting with Qin Shi. If you ignored the content of their conversation, the atmosphere was similar to a business gathering. Just a few glasses of wine and there would be a harmonious atmosphere of drinking and chatting. Perhaps it was because they were accompanied by their parents. The children quickly adapted to the classroom environment, and then they began to play freely. A few of them were lively and started to clamor about going outside to play on the slide. Seeing that the atmosphere was lively enough, the teacher came to the center of the classroom and kindly asked the children to stand up one by one. Then she guided them to start introducing themselves. It was the little girl's first time facing such a situation, so she was naturally a little embarrassed when it was her turn. Under Qin Shi's constant encouragement, the little girl finally mustered up the courage to stand up and say timidly, My name is Qin Yan. I'm 5 years old this year. It was just a few simple words, but she stuttered as if she was stuttering. After saying that, the little girl immediately shut her mouth and stood there timidly, not knowing what to do. Very good. From today onwards, Qin Yan is a member of our big family. Come, let's welcome her together. Welcome the new student. After saying that, the teacher took the lead and applauded. When the children saw this, they followed the teacher's example and clapped while shouting, Welcome the new student. Speaking of which, this was the first time in Yan Yan's life that she had officially integrated into a group. That strange feeling immediately made her feel a little overwhelmed, so she could only lower her head and constantly tug at the corner of her clothes with her hands. That shy and bashful look on her face was extremely adorable. After Qin Shi pulled her back to her seat, the little thing slowly opened her eyes again. Then she carefully listened to each student's self-introduction, and under the guidance of the teacher, she kept applauding. It looked like she was trying to integrate herself into this new group. The little girl was already so nervous, not to mention the brothers. Her sister-in-law's dizziness wasn't very obvious because she had already stepped into the celestial being realm. Therefore, Qin Shi came to a conclusion. This symptom might be effectively suppressed with the improvement of her cultivation base. In this case, he naturally had to urge Qin Ruoying to cultivate diligently at all times. After all, he had already destroyed the Sundial Brilliance Temple. Without the blessing of 8 times the time difference, Qin Ruoying could only rely on her own efforts. Unfortunately, her talent wasn't good, so she could only work harder than ordinary people. And this was the fundamental reason why Qin Ruoying had been living in seclusion recently. Today's weather was good. The chill of early autumn was swept away by the warm sunshine. The autumn air was refreshing and the clouds were light and the wind was light. Everything was so tranquil, just like Qin Shi's mood at the moment. The couple stood side by side on the steps of the west wing. Looking at the 3 lively and cute little guys, the corners of their mouths couldn't help but reveal a faint smile. However, life was like a train. After arriving at this station, there was still the next station. Qin Shi wasn't even ready to welcome the next station when the train suddenly stopped here. In just a moment, the figures of his sister-in-law and Qin Yongyan suddenly appeared on the steps outside the main hall, and Qin Shi immediately held Qin Ruoying's hand. In addition to the 3 children who were still fooling around, even Gu Lao and Xiao Yuan noticed the strangeness and couldn't help but immediately look up at the sky. They saw that the sky that was still bright and beautiful just a moment ago had been shrouded by large dark clouds in the blink of an eye. It was clearly 10 o'clock in the morning, but the sky was gloomy as if night had fallen. The speed of change was simply puzzling. Why did the weather suddenly change? Gu Lao looked at the sky in surprise and immediately stood up. Then he quickly said to Xiao Yuan, "It looks like it's going to rain. Quick, let's put away the tables and chairs." However, As soon as Gu Lao's voice fell, bean-sized raindrops suddenly fell from the sky. Like a summer shower, the dense raindrops continued to fall from the sky. Almost instantly, Gu Lao and Xiao Yuan became drowned rats. And at this moment, Qin Shi, who was standing on the steps, suddenly reached his hand into the rain and then opened his palm, allowing the raindrops to constantly hit his palm. Feeling the surging spiritual energy contained in the rain, Qin Shi's brows almost instantly twisted into the shape of the Chinese character Sichuan. What kind of shower was this? This was simply an unprecedented tide of spiritual energy. Spiritual energy liquefied, benefiting the common people. This was Chapter 364. Rain moistens all things and nourishes the common people. In this bleak and cold late autumn, a sudden downpour instantly extinguished everyone's rising spirits because of the National Day holiday. Heavy rain was always accompanied by strong winds, and this was the north. When the heavy rain came down, it immediately drenched people from top to bottom. On the streets of the capital, people hid under the eaves and shivered. Everyone was hoping that the rain would stop, but they didn't know that this rain, it was actually a blessing bestowed by God to all things. From the moment the rain started to fall, the big cat was like a clockwork doll that had been activated, running wildly in the rain. Big Head, who had always been trapped in the fish tank and couldn't go anywhere, jumped out of the fish tank like a fish leaping through the dragon gate. Then, through his own hard struggle, he finally jumped into the heavy rain. For most children, being in the rain was always a very fun thing to do, and the three little guys were no exception. At first, the brothers were a little restrained because Gu Lao was present. However, Nian looked back at Qin Shi and found that her parents' attention was on the sky. She rushed into the heavy rain and then jumped around the yard with the big cat. She stepped on the water in the yard like a Peppa Pig who liked to step on mud. Her little face was full of excited smiles. The rain drenched her hair, and the line of water almost blurred her eyes, but this made her even happier. Under the constant urging of the little guy, the brothers finally couldn't resist the temptation. The two glanced at Gu Lao, who had just rushed up the steps to hide from the rain, and then jumped into the heavy rain like a wisp of smoke. In the heavy rain in the yard, the three little guys laughed happily. At this time, Gu Lao suddenly came back to his senses. But when he was about to scold the brothers, Qin Shi's voice suddenly sounded in his ear. Let them play for a while. A little rain won't be a problem. There's heating at home. If it's cold, they'll know to come back. Seeing how happy the three children were, coupled with Qin Shi's persuasion, Gu Lao's lips moved a few times, but in the end he didn't interrupt them. The heavy rain poured down, washing away the hustle and bustle of the entire city. It was as if the only sound left in the world was the sound of the rain. It was a feast and a carnival. Under Qin Shi's signal, Qin Ruoying also walked into the heavy rain step by step. Shangjing rarely rained, so there was a lot of dust and impurities accumulated in the clouds. When it landed on one's body, there was a sticky feeling. But today's rain was different. Although it was a little cold, the rainwater was exceptionally clear and pure, giving people a comfortable feeling all over their bodies. Spiritual energy turned into rain. Even for Qin Shi, this was the first time he had seen such a situation. For a moment, he couldn't help but walk into the rain and began to wantonly plunder the spiritual energy. Rain after a long drought is truly a blessing in life. However, just when everyone was celebrating because of the rain, Qin Ruoying suddenly felt her legs go soft and she staggered. If Qin Shi hadn't caught her in time, she would have fallen into the puddles on the ground. Ying, what's wrong? My head is a little dizzy. Qin Ruoying covered her forehead. Her originally rosy face was stained with a layer of white frost, looking as if she was sick. At this time, Qin Xueqing also seemed to feel something and couldn't help but blurt out to Qin Shi, "It's here again, that feeling." After saying that, even she covered her forehead with a look of discomfort. Qin Xueqing was already a celestial, but even she was so uncomfortable, one could imagine what kind of experience Qin Ruoying was experiencing at this moment. Qin Shi nervously supported Qin Ruoying, and at the same time constantly poured his true essence into her, trying to ease her symptoms. Why did she feel dizzy? Qin Shi seriously considered all the possibilities. Suddenly, a thought flashed through Qin Shi's mind. It wasn't the first time Qin Ruoying felt dizzy. Whenever this happened, it must be when the tide of spiritual energy was surging. Was it because of the tide of spiritual energy? It obviously wasn't. The spiritual energy of heaven and earth was always the most important thing to cultivators, so how could it cause discomfort? Since natural factors were ruled out, only man-made factors were left. In addition to the information he had obtained on Daiyu Island, Qin could almost conclude that this definitely had something to do with the sky-bearing technique and the floating dawn mirror. If he guessed correctly, such a huge tide of spiritual energy had appeared on Earth, so the people behind the Divine Gate wanted to use it to open the Divine Gate. But because he had already destroyed the 5 holy temples, the Divine Gate hadn't been opened. The Divine Gate, the holy temples, the tide of spiritual energy, Si Ming Shen knew, the sky-bearing technique and the floating dawn mirror, everything was actually closely related. Just as Qin was pondering the root of the problem, Qin Ruoying seemed to have suddenly seen something. She looked up at the sky and muttered, I see it, there are people in the sky, they want to come down." As soon as she finished speaking, her body went limp and she completely fainted. Ying? The sudden change really shocked Qin. He almost instantly carried Qin Ruoying back to the West Wing. Looking at the unconscious Qin Ruoying lying on the bed, Qin's mood fell to the bottom. At this moment, Qin Xueqing also rushed into the West Wing. He leaned over and touched Qin Ruoying's cheek, then immediately got up and walked straight out of the door. "I'm going out first. If she wakes up early, remember to tell her I'll be back soon." Qin Xueqing felt that something was wrong with Qin and suddenly couldn't help but blurt out, "Wait! Where are you going?" Qin stopped in his tracks. Qin Xueqing looked at him and then added in a slight panic, "You didn't even tell me where you were going. How can I tell my sister where you're going?" Seeing that his sister-in-law was so concerned, Qin had to soften his tone, and smiled at her. "Don't worry, I'm just going to Daiyu Island to get something. I'll be back soon." Chapter 367. Daiyu Island. Heron Island, the pavilion in the middle of the lake. As the saying goes, the cicada senses the golden wind before it moves, sending the impermanence of death without knowing it. Ever since Jiang Jingqing was injured by that outsider who came out of nowhere, the sky above Daiyu Island seemed to be shrouded in thick dark clouds. Everyone in the clan was anxious and the atmosphere was gloomy. Everyone seemed to be more cautious than usual. As the clan leader, Jiang Yuankue did not step forward to appease everyone at such a critical time. Instead, he stayed on Heron Island all day doing something unknown. Everyone thought that the clan leader was planning something big, but no one knew. Jiang Yuankue himself was confused. Apart from preserving the most complete inheritance, the Jiang clan also had an immortal old monster who had lived for thousands of years. Based on this alone, Daiyu Island was destined to have too many secrets that no one knew. The great ancestor's seniority was there. Once the old man spoke, Jiang Yuankue naturally had to bow and listen. The great ancestor's words were simple. He wanted him to wait outside the pavilion in the middle of the lake and wait patiently for the fated person to appear. The fated person? Who was the fated person? Who was the fated person? The great ancestor's words must have a deeper meaning, so Jiang Yuankue had been thinking about this question for the past few days. However, no matter how hard he thought about it, he could not come up with a reliable answer. Until this day, a sudden tide of spiritual energy enveloped the entire world. As the place with the densest spiritual energy within 100 miles, a cloud vortex inevitably appeared in the sky above Daiyu Island. This scene was very similar to the scene described in Immortals at the Magpie Bridge. When the golden wind and the jade do meet, it surpasses countless things in the human world. It was only at this moment that Jiang Yuankue suddenly realized the sky had changed. Sure enough, when sword rays streaked across the sky and shot toward the vortex from afar, Jiang Yuankue finally understood who the fated person the great ancestor was talking about was. In this world, there was actually someone who was unwilling to ascend to the great world, and was instead trying his best to stop the divine gate from opening? Going against the entire great world with his own strength. What kind of courage was this? Even Jiang Yuankue could not help but be fascinated. However, Jiang Yuankue was the clan leader after all. He had to think carefully about everything. Therefore, in the next moment, a thought suddenly popped up in his mind. If the divine gate could not be opened, who was the biggest beneficiary? Weren't they the 5 lands of legacy? Even though the old ancestor had never explicitly mentioned it, Jiang Yuankue was keenly aware of the problem at this moment. Among them there were even those above diviners led by Jiang Jingqing. The future had come and it had arrived. The Jiang clan was like a ferocious beast entrenched on Daiyu Island. At this moment, it finally revealed its ferocious and terrifying true face. Among the people by the lake, Jiang Yuankue's seniority was the lowest. However, due to his status as the current patriarch, Jiang Yuankue was fortunate enough to stand in the first row of the bridge. The entire place was silent. One could hear a pin drop. Everyone lowered their heads and ears, quietly waiting for the old ancestor to speak. No one knew who the old ancestor was talking to, nor did they know the content of their conversation. In short, after a long time, the old ancestor's voice suddenly rang out, instantly shaking everyone's hearts. I am Jiang Yin, the 17th generation patriarch of the Jiang clan. Today I declare, the Jiang clan will form an alliance with Mr. Chen and fight against Tiandu together. In ancient times, what crime did the Jiang clan commit? But the divine ancestor, for his own selfish reasons, listed our Jiang clan as sinners and suffered the pain of being trapped for 10,000 years. However, there is no need for such a crime. Today we will follow Mr. Chen to expel the heavenly gate and break off Tiandu's path of retreat in order to protect our homeland. This is to inherit the legacy of our ancestors, where righteousness lies. All the clansmen of the Jiang clan should take this as their responsibility. Everyone knows this. This sudden declaration of war instantly stupefied all of the Jiang clan clansmen present. The old ancestor wanted to crusade against Tiandu? Didn't the clan often offer sacrifices and pray for Tiandu to open a door so that the clansmen could ascend to the great world? Why did he suddenly want to rebel and go against Tiandu with the banner of Tiandu? Perhaps because the news came too suddenly, everyone was unable to accept it for a while. Many hot-tempered clansmen risked disobeying the old ancestor and kept asking why in a loud voice. One had to know that the great world was the immortal world that everyone dreamed of. What was the purpose of a person's life? If it weren't for the limited conditions on earth, how could they be trapped in the heavenly realm? Only by going to the great world would they have the possibility of continuing to break through. Only by going to the great world and improving their realm could they live for another 100, 200, or even 1,000 years. Everyone had long had enough of being unable to break through because of the shackles of heaven and earth. It wasn't that they couldn't do it, but that the conditions didn't allow it. And this was the fundamental reason why people felt sad. The crowd was restless. Everyone was questioning the old ancestor's decision. After all, as a qualified husband, he could only use the iPhone 8 that his wife had exchanged for if she had switched to the iPhone 10. The logic was that simple. Qinshi had even made up his mind. Even if he had to turn hostile and snatch the Adumbra flower, he was going to snatch it back. Ginseng flowers nourish the body, blood thorns nourish the mind, and the Adumbra flower. Although Qinshi's alchemy skills could not be considered top-notch, he should be able to use these 3 precious herbs to concoct a cauldron of 10 complete tonics. Ying would eat the meat and he would drink the soup. Wouldn't that be perfect? Perhaps he could even use this opportunity to heal the internal injuries in his body and rule over this world in his peak state. By then, he only needed to stand in front of the heavenly gate and see if anyone could come out of the great world. Qinshi pondered silently. Although he really wanted to obtain this Adumbra flower, he did not let his guard down because of this. As the saying went, one who was unaccountably solicitous was hiding evil intentions. The old man's motives were indeed very suspicious. Why did he have to give this Adumbra flower to him for no reason? Qinshi could not figure it out. The Jiang clan members probably could not figure it out either. But now was not the time to delve into this question, so Qinshi could only put this question aside for the time being and wait for the Jiang clan's final statement. Although the old man had already formed Ying, after losing his physical body, he was more like a mascot and did not have any substantial deterrence. So Qinshi did not have much hope. Didn't he see that the group of people opposite him looked like they wanted to eat him alive? The watermelon that they had raised for a year had been stolen just like that. No one would be able to accept that, right? If a fight had to break out, for the sake of the old man, Qin could be merciful and guarantee that he would not harm anyone's life. Qin was prepared to fight, but the development of the situation was somewhat beyond his expectations. After hearing the old man's order to deal with them according to the clan rules, the originally restless crowd instantly quieted down. Everyone glared angrily at Qin, but no one dared to stand out and question the old man's decision. From this, it could be seen how high the old man's position in the Jiang clan was. Yuan Kuei go. After the old man spoke for the third time, no matter how unwilling Jiang Yuan Kuei was, he could only sigh helplessly in the end. Then he bowed and replied, Yuan Kuei accepts the order. Old ancestor, please wait for a moment. After he finished speaking, Jiang Yuan Kuei flicked his sleeves and left with an indignant expression. He was the current clan leader of the Jiang clan and was the old ancestor's direct descendant. So, Jiang Yuan Kuei had always thought that the old ancestor was biased towards him. I don't accept this. At this moment, Jiang Fengyan was like a child who had been wronged. After being scolded by an adult, he wanted to escape from this place as far as possible. However, among the people present, the person with the lowest cultivation was a diviner. How could he tolerate such nonsense? Jiang Fengyan had probably thought of this as well. Therefore, while he was running, he grabbed the adumbra flower and stuffed it into his mouth. Since his father could not have it, then no one else could. He would die today. Chapter 370. People were always greedy. The so-called 5 poisonous hearts of Buddhism: greed, anger, stupidity, hesitation, and doubt. In ancient books, it was often mentioned that lust was the leader of all evils, but this lust did not refer to sex, but to indulge and indulge without restraint, which was also greed. That is, the source of all evils. Greed was the leader of all evils. Greed, in fact, was the root of all troubles. Could it be that Jiang Fengyan really took the adumbra flower because he refused to accept the decision of the ancestor? People often said, even if you have money, you need to be alive to spend it. But this adumbra flower was a rare treasure that could not be bought with money. And the most important point was, this flower was easy to take and one only needed to open their mouth and swallow the flower, and it would immediately take effect. In the face of such a strong temptation, even someone with a firm heart like Jiang Yuan Kuei could not help but feel greedy, let alone Jiang Fengyan, a young man who was still wet behind the ears. Therefore, Jiang Fengyan decided to gamble with his little life. As long as he cooked the rice, the ancestor should not do anything to him because he was the eldest son of the direct line of descent. No matter what, Jiang Fengyan was still a pure-blooded Jiang clansman. Even if he took the adumbra flower, it would just flow to his family's field. It had to be said that Jiang Fengyan was indeed very bold. But he neglected the most important question, and that was, how far could he run? When he was caught, would he be able to successfully swallow this adumbra flower? Jiang Fengyan overestimated his speed and greatly underestimated the pursuit he would face. In fact, the moment Jiang Fengyan ran away, Qin had already noticed something was wrong. The reason why he did not immediately take action was actually because he wanted to see if they could solve this problem on their own for the sake of the old man. After all, he was just a guest who came to visit. How could a guest go to the kitchen to serve dishes by himself? Based on this consideration, Qin did not stop Jiang Fengyan. However, the Jiang clan members present seemed to have been struck dumb by this sudden turn of events. After a long while, a few people came back to their senses first, and then directly set off to chase. The speed of running was naturally not as fast as the speed of flying. But Jiang Fengyan never thought of running away. He only wanted to use this opportunity to stall for time so that he could successfully swallow the entire adumbra flower. Therefore, as soon as those people rose into the air, Jiang Fengyan had already stuffed the adumbra flower into his mouth. Sigh. Seeing that it was too late to stop him, Qin could only sigh silently and prepare to do it himself. However, just as Qin was about to attack, the old man's voice suddenly exploded from the clouds, causing the entire Heron Island to tremble. Evil creature! How dare you! That voice was so loud that it sounded like the furious roar of a deity. Immediately afterward, a huge amount of true essence gushed out from the pavilion in the middle of the lake. The ferocity of its momentum was as if the heavens and earth were collapsing, and the mountains were collapsing and the earth was cracking. An incomparably surging Zhen Yuan poured out from the pavilion in the middle of the lake. The lake water that was affected by the Zhen Yuan suddenly sprayed up into the sky like a fountain. In that instant, Raging waves filled the sky and the mountains and rivers trembled. The entire Heron Island was trembling in the old man's anger. Seeing this, Jiang Yuankui was so scared that his liver and gallbladder were almost torn apart. He could only look up to the sky and shout in panic, "This child is not sensible. Ancestor, please show mercy and spare his life." Unfortunately, Jiang Yuankui's words were still too late. A water column suddenly rose from the lake and then shot toward Jiang Fengyan at an unimaginable speed. At that moment, time seemed to have stopped. Jiang Fengyan even maintained the posture of wanting to swallow the adumbra flower as he ran. Boom. However, the huge wave arrived first. Like a flash flood, it instantly swallowed Jiang Fengyan whole. When the huge wave dissipated, the rocks, weeds, trees and slopes where Jiang Fengyan was standing were all buried by the huge wave. As a result, the area within a few hundred meters had become a ruined scene after the flash flood. There was nothing left. Only broken trees, broken branches and yellow soil were left on the ground. After seeing such a scene, Jiang Yuankui couldn't help but feel sad. After rushing to the place where Jiang Fengyan was before, he completely disregarded his image and used his hands to search the soil. "Fengyan? Fengyan? Where are you? Father is here to save you. Where are you? Answer me." The so-called father and son were connected by heart. At this moment, it was deeply reflected. Even if Jiang Fengyan had committed a heinous crime, Jiang Yuankui couldn't bear to see him suffer any harm. But how powerful was the ancestor's power? With just one move, everything in front of him was wiped out, including Jiang Fengyan. When he thought that his son might have been killed by the ancestor himself and died without a complete corpse, Jiang Yuankui couldn't help but lie in the soil and cry bitterly. But at this moment, the old man's voice sounded again. "Pass my order. Jiang Fengyan has committed a crime of disobedience. He is punished to meditate in the dry pool for 60 years. During this period, without my permission, he is not allowed to take a step out of the dry pool." The dry pool was the place where the Jiang clan punished sinners. There were all kinds of torturing formations set up in it, but the ancestor asked Jiang Fengyan to stay in there for 60 years, which was 60 years. This could already be considered the harshest punishment. But when Jiang Yuankui heard this sentence, it was as if he had heard great news. He quickly knelt on the ground and kowtowed while shouting, "Thank you, ancestor, for not killing me. Thank you, ancestor, for not killing me. Thank you, ancestor, for not killing me." After the old man made his move, this farce finally came to an end. As for the adumbra flower that countless people yearned for day and night, under the old man's protection, it flew into Qin Shi's hands unharmed. The flower finally fell into the hands of the fated person. "Thank you." After reaching out to take the adumbra flower, Qin Shi turned around and looked at the pavilion in the middle of the lake with interest. The old man really hit it well. Just from this, Qin Shi was enough to judge that the old man's strength at his peak was definitely not inferior to Bai Hong's, as expected of an old man who had lived for more than 1,000 years. He really did not make a move, but when he did, it was indeed shocking. Qin Shi had always thought that after the old man lost his physical body, he had completely become the Jiang clan's mascot. Now it seemed that he had underestimated the heroes of the world. The old man must have mastered some secret technique that even he did not know about. That was why he could continue to cast spells without a physical body. To be honest, Qin Shi was now more and more interested in this old man. He hid too many secrets, and Qin Shi could not understand his motives at all. There was no such thing as a free lunch in this world. So here came the question. From the beginning, the old man had been especially attentive to him. Now, he did not hesitate to seriously injure his descendants to give him the adumbra flower. Chapter 371. 1,000-year-old Go, the reincarnation of the Chicken King. If life was a survival competition, the old man's chances of winning the chicken dinner would be far greater than anyone else's. He wasn't afraid of his opponent being tough or reckless, he was only afraid of his opponent being cunning. If he really met such a wretched opponent, no matter how strong he was, he couldn't help but mutter in his heart. After all, who knew when this old fellow would pop out and stab him in the back? Qin Shi was indeed very interested in the old man's secrets. Thus, after obtaining the adumbra flower, he was prepared to return to the pavilion in the middle of the lake to have a good chat with the old man. However, he had just taken a step when the old man's voice suddenly rang out again. "Since Sir has already obtained the adumbra flower, you should be returning from a rewarding journey today. There are many matters to attend to in the clan. You've also seen the farce just now, please don't take it to heart. I'll teach them a good lesson right now. I'll definitely make sure they remember what rules are. That's all for today. It's inconvenient for me to move around, please forgive me. Yunke, help me send the guests off. After hearing the elder master's words, Jiang Yuankue immediately stood up from the soil and wiped the mud off his face. At the same time he replied rather excitedly, Yuankue obeys. After he finished speaking, Jiang Yuankue shook violently and used his inner yuan to shake off all the mud and dust on his body. His entire person looked like a brand new person, as if he had just taken a bath. If the elder master had asked him to send the guests off, that meant, in the elder master's heart, he, Jiang Yuankue, was still the current clan leader of the Jiang clan. The elder master didn't hold a grudge against him because of what had just happened. How could Jiang Yuankue not be excited? Thus he immediately ran over to Chen Shi eagerly. There's no need to send the guests off. Seeing that the old man was closing the door to his guests, Chen Shi could only smile and shake his head. No matter what, they were still considered allies now. Furthermore, he had received a greeting gift from the old man. Naturally, he couldn't cause any unhappiness with the old man over such a small matter. After all, they had just formed an alliance and were still in their honeymoon period. I came in a hurry today, so I didn't bring any gifts. Instead, I received a big gift from you for no reason. I'll remember this favor for now. Once I've refined this adumbra flower into a pill, I'll bring a portion back for you. That way your grandchildren won't blame me for stealing their good stuff. Having said that, Chen Shi shifted his gaze to the direction where Jiang Fengyan was just now. That location was originally a small forest. The forest was full of fragrant grass and flowers. It was indeed a place with excellent scenery. As the saying went, knowing someone by their reputation was not as good as meeting them in person. The Jiang clan members present finally had a deep understanding of the three words, Mr. Chen. Sir, you have great skills. This old man has learned something today, the old man praised from the bottom of his heart. After Chen Shi heard that, he smiled and waved his hand. He replied nonchalantly, all right, I won't say any more pleasantries. I'll visit you another day. Goodbye. As soon as she finished speaking, Chen Shi suddenly disappeared under the watchful eyes of the crowd. After he left, many Jiang clan members seemed to have come back to their senses. They hurriedly looked around, trying to find his departing figure. Chen Shi was also very satisfied with his performance just now. Therefore, on the way back to Shangjing, he was still recalling that feeling in his mind. Compared to when he made Qing Shan wear the red makeup, his current methods could be considered to be more skillful. In fact, it could be counted as a spell, but it could also be counted as not, because it included the use of vital essence and Chen Shi's comprehension of the laws of heaven and earth. It was definitely not as simple as casting a spell. The laws of heaven and earth were a very mysterious thing. From the reincarnation of life and death, to the rotation of the sun and moon, to the rise of clouds and rosy clouds, to the blowing of the wind on the hills. Even if it was as small as gravel or dust, it contained a certain amount of the laws of heaven and earth. Just as the eminent monks often said, every sip and every bite was predetermined. There must be a reason for the Lanine silk fruit. This made Chen Shi feel a little strange. After all, he usually did not cultivate at all. When he had time, he would accompany his wife and play with his children. Why did his comprehension of the laws of heaven and earth become deeper? Could it be, this was the so-called cultivation in the secular world? Only by experiencing the secular world could one taste the various forms of life and enjoy the 7 emotions and 6 desires. Since Tianxian already had the 3 paths of heartless, unruffled, and heartless, then why couldn't he create a brand new emotional path based on his own experience? Benevolence, righteousness, propriety, wisdom and trust, gentleness, respect, frugality and tolerance. With the traditional virtues of Wuxia as the outline, he created his own path. Chapter 372. For ordinary people, National Day was still National Day, except that there was a rainstorm that didn't last long. It was sunny after the rain, and the autumn air was refreshing. It was a good time for sightseeing. With the rise of short videos, many cities in the southwest began to gradually become popular on the internet, which also diverted a lot of tourists from the old tourist cities. As the capital of a country, Shangjing had its own unique cultural heritage, so during the National Day holiday, the capital was still the first choice for people to travel in the country. The Great Wall, the Forbidden City, Tiananmen Square, Prince Gong's Mansion, Summer Palace, Hohai, Almost all the famous scenic spots were crowded with tourists. As far as the eye could see, there was a dense mass of people at the back of their heads. It was truly crowded and bustling with noise and excitement. As for the annoying rain just now, obviously it was completely forgotten by everyone. However, it was because of the heavy rain just now that Shangjing finally ushered in a good day with clear skies and clear winds. The sky was blue and the clouds were white. There was no trace of fog, and the sky was blue like the satin produced by the Jiangning weaving department. It looked particularly smooth and soft, and people couldn't help but want to reach out and touch it. If you add in the fresh and pleasant air, even the tourists who were complaining about the rain just now couldn't wait for another heavy rain like this tomorrow, so that they could enjoy the most complete classical beauty of Shangjing. All the scenic spots were lively, but the most unique old alley of Shangjing was still so quiet. Tourists in twos and threes stood in the alley taking photos. When they saw Qin Shi directly open the door of the courtyard, they couldn't help but show a trace of envy in their eyes. The courtyard of Shangjing. It was very valuable. When Qin Shi crossed the Chuehua gate with big and small bags, Qin Ruoying had already woken up. Qin Xueqing accompanied her in the room and talked. Because Gu Lao hadn't seen Qin Shi for a long time, he called Xiao Yuan to the kitchen to prepare dinner. The three little guys' activity level was seriously over the limit, so when Qin Shi entered the door he saw the three of them lying on the sofa watching cartoons attentively. This was their family's national day. It was an ordinary national day. The sister-in-law seemed to want to know what Qin Shi was doing just now, so she couldn't help but ask a few times. However, she was fooled by Qin Shi. Going to Daiyu Island was an official matter, but going home was a private matter. Public affairs and private affairs should not be mixed together. Qin Shi had always been very clear about this. After the backbone returned, the Sihiyuan quickly became lively again as if nothing had happened. Gu Lao was in charge of cooking and Qin Shi and Xiao Yuan were his assistants.